Welcome back to another story on Arcane Paradox. This time, we're bringing you, what if Fleur's Veela Allure shattered 18 blocks on Harry at Yule Ball and ancient mate bond activated publicly. Your likes fuel our creativity. Subscribe and stay tuned. Here's the story. Chapter 1, Shatter. The Great Hall had never looked more like a dream someone had tried too hard to make real. Ice sculptures lined the walls, swans and dragons and things that didn't have names, catching the candlelight and throwing it back in fragments across the stone floor. The enchanted ceiling had gone deep winter tonight, a proper black with stars so crisp and close you'd swear you could reach up and burn your fingers on them. Someone had strung silver along the house tables, which had been pushed to the edges of the room to make space for the dancing floor, and the whole place smelled of pine and something sweeter underneath, the kind of warm, rich smell that made you feel like you were 5 years old and it was the morning of something wonderful. Harry Potter stood near the entrance and felt absolutely miserable. His dress robes were the green ones that Mrs. Weasley had ordered, and they fit well enough, better than Ron's, which were a catastrophe in maroon, but the problem wasn't the robes. The problem was that he was a champion, which meant he was expected to open the dancing, which meant he was expected to know how to dance, which he did not really, not in any way that counted. Professor McGonagall had given him exactly 3 lessons in a broom cupboard off the Transfiguration corridor, and each one had ended with her looking at him the way she looked at students who'd accidentally vanished their own hands. "You'll be fine," Hermione had said, and she'd meant it kindly, but she was currently radiant in robes of a dusty periwinkle blue that Harry hadn't known she owned, her hair somehow smooth and pinned up and entirely unlike itself, and she was walking in with Victor Crumb, and every person in the corridor had turned to look at her. So clearly Hermione had solved problems Harry had not. Parvati Patil was beside him, lovely in robes of shocking pink, and she'd been nothing but gracious about being asked last minute, which made Harry feel worse rather than better. She deserved someone who wanted to be here. He wanted to be almost anywhere else. "Nervous?" Parvati asked, and she was smiling, genuinely, no edge to it. "Terrified," he said honestly. She laughed. "Don't step on my feet and we'll call it a success." The doors opened for the champions and Harry walked in and the whole room turned to look, and he smiled the smile he'd gotten better at over 4 years, the one that didn't reach his eyes but looked like it might if you weren't paying close attention. The weird sisters were on the stage at the far end, instruments in hand, waiting. The teachers were at the staff table. Dumbledore was beaming. Karkaroff had his arms folded and his fur collar up, and his expression said he would rather be in Siberia. Harry found the other champions. Cedric Diggory, handsome and easy in his robes, had Cho Chang on his arm, and the smile he gave Harry was genuine. They'd found an odd sort of mutual respect over the tournament, the kind you develop when you've both nearly died and neither of you wanted the other to. Victor Crumb was walking in with Hermione, and he had the expression of a man who could not quite believe his luck, which Harry privately thought was the correct response. And then there was Fleur Delacour. Harry had seen Fleur before. He'd been in the same room as her multiple times since September. He knew, academically, that she was a Veela, or Part 1, quarter by the rumors, and he knew what that meant. He'd read the textbooks. He'd felt the pull at the World Cup, brief and distant, more like the suggestion of warmth than actual warmth. But knowledge is a very different thing from experience. Fleur walked through the doors in silver robes that moved like water, her pale gold hair loose tonight and catching light that didn't quite exist, generated, he realized distantly, by whatever she was made of. She had her arm through the elbow of Roger Davies, who had the expression of a man experiencing a religious event, and she was smiling the kind of smile that suggested she was entirely aware of every room she'd ever entered and had made her peace with it. Harry noticed her the way you notice a fire across a dark field. Impossible not to. But he turned back to Parvati and made himself focus, made himself think about the steps, and the music started. The dancing was not as bad as it could have been. He didn't step on Parvati's feet. He got through the first song without embarrassing himself badly enough to constitute an incident. Other couples joined them on the floor, the room opened up, the music shifted, conversation started to weave through the noise, and Harry began to breathe properly for the first time all evening. He danced 2 more songs, said something apologetic to Parvati about needing a drink of water, and escaped to the edges of the room where the ice sculptures were, where he could watch the dancing without being in it. That was where he was standing when it happened. He'd been watching Ron and Padma, who were not dancing so much as occupying the same space and looking in opposite directions, and he'd been thinking about getting some of whatever the pink punch was because he was genuinely thirsty now, and he'd been half listening to 2 Hufflepuff fifth years nearby discussing whether the ice dragon sculpture was genuinely enchanted or just carved very precisely, and then everything changed. It came in a wave. Not heat exactly, though heat was the closest word. It was more like the feeling of stepping through a doorway from cold outside air into a warm room, except the doorway was inside him and what came through it was nothing as simple as warmth. It was pressure. It was pressure and light and sound all at once, a kind of full body ringing the way a bell rings when you're standing too close, and Harry grabbed the nearest ice sculpture, the swan, with both hands because his knees had simply stopped working. Across the room, Fleur had looked up. She hadn't meant to. He could tell that later, reconstructing the moment, she'd been mid-sentence with Davies, turned toward him, completely engaged, and then her head came around like it was on a string and her eyes found Harry across 40 feet of dancing couples with the absolute precision of something that had been looking for him for a very long time. Their eyes met. The great hall went wrong. It was subtle at first. A shimmer in the air around Harry, like heat haze off summer pavement, except the room was cool. The shimmer wasn't coming from outside him, it was coming out of him, a visible disturbance in the magic of the room, and the students nearest him began to back away without quite knowing why, the way animals retreat from a change in air pressure before a storm arrives. Harry felt it differently. Felt it as a cracking, a series of them, rapid and rhythmic, like ice fracturing under weight, like walls coming down in sequence, like locks turning that had been closed so long he hadn't known they were there. Each one hit him with a physical jolt. His glasses fogged. His scar, dormant all evening, blessedly quiet, blazed white-hot for 3 full seconds and then went cold in a way it never had before, not hot cold but empty cold, like something had been sitting on the nerve and lifted. 1. Crack. 2. Crack. 5. 7. 12. Ron had turned from Padma and was staring at him, and his face had gone the color of old wax. Harry, mate, you're 17. Crack. 18. The last one didn't crack. It shattered, and the shimmer around Harry exploded outward in a silent pulse that made every candle in the great hall gutter simultaneously and made every ice sculpture ring like crystal struck with a knife and made Dumbledore stand up from the staff table so fast his chair fell backward, and Harry heard it hit the floor from 40 feet away with perfect, ringing clarity because something had happened to his hearing too. Something had happened to everything, every sense dialed past any setting. He'd known before, the cold air tasting of pine and silver and Parvati's perfume from 10 feet away and the heat of 500 bodies, and underneath all of it was a pull. Not toward a direction. Not toward a thing. Toward a person. Fleur Delacour had released Davy's arm without looking at him and she was walking across the great hall floor and couples were parting around her without quite knowing why, moving aside the way water moves around a stone, and her expression was something Harry had never seen on her face before, all the composed, elegant architecture of it gone, stripped clean, replaced by something raw and frightened and absolutely certain. She stopped 3 feet from him. The shimmer was still in the air between them. Visible. Everyone in the great hall could see it. The weird sisters had stopped playing. Mon Dieu, Fleur said. Not to him. Not to anyone. Just to the air. Her voice was very quiet. Her hands, Harry noticed, were trembling. It cannot be. What's happening? Harry said. His own voice didn't sound like his voice. It sounded more, fuller, lower, carrying differently in the stone room. What is this? You felt it, she said, and it wasn't quite a question. Like 18 things breaking inside my chest, yeah. He paused. That was yours? No. Her eyes, silver gray, he was noticing for the first time, not blue, silver, were fixed on him with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable and wasn't. That was not mine. That was yours. She glanced upward at the staff table. Quick. Sharp. Those were blocks. Someone blocked you. Blocks? What's happening, Fleur? She looked back at him and something crossed her face, a war between about 4 different feelings, none of them small, and then she lifted her chin and said, with the clipped precision of someone choosing their words with great care, we have apparently triggered an ancient mate bond. The silence that followed was the loudest silence Harry had ever stood inside. And then it ended. It ended because Lavender Brown said, "Oh my God," at a volume normally reserved for Quidditch victories, and that broke something loose in the crowd, and the whispering started, not the polite kind, the kind that's barely a half step below shouting, the kind that means 200 people have decided that whatever social contract governed their silence no longer applies. Harry heard his name. He heard Fleur's name. He heard mate bond in at least 3 languages. He heard someone, Seamus, it sounded like, say something in odd profanity that McGonagall would have house-pointed him into negative integers for. Is this really, that's actually a thing that happens? Ron said. He had materialized at Harry's elbow at some point and he was looking at Fleur with an expression that was half awe and half something more complicated. In real life? Weasley, Fleur said, without looking at him, please be quiet. He was. Instantly. Harry might have found that funny if his hands hadn't been shaking. Dumbledore was there. Harry didn't see him move, one moment he was at the staff table, and the next he was simply present, the way mountains are present, and the crowd opened for him like it always did. He was still smiling, but it was a different smile from his usual one. Tighter. Working harder. Perhaps, he said, and his voice carried the whole room, warm and easy as if he were announcing a change to the dessert menu, we might give Mr. Potter and Mademoiselle Delacour a moment of privacy. The hall is still available for dancing, the Weird Sisters, I believe, are ready to continue whenever. No, Harry said. He surprised himself. He surprised Ron, who made an involuntary noise. He surprised Dumbledore, whose smile went still in a way it very rarely did. Harry, my boy, she said, someone blocked me. Harry's voice was still doing that unfamiliar carrying thing, and now he understood it was because the blocks, whatever they'd been blocking, specifically, included his voice and his presence and everything that made the magic around him his. 18 times. She said someone blocked me 18 times. He looked at Dumbledore and he kept his voice level with an effort that surprised him because the anger was there underneath, a clean solid thing, not hot and spiking the way his anger usually was but deep and structural, like bedrock. Did you do that? The great hall was completely, utterly silent. Dumbledore held Harry's gaze for 3 seconds, which was, Harry thought, 3 seconds longer than most people could have managed in that moment. This, Dumbledore said quietly, is not the venue for, I think it kind of is, Harry said. Since it happened in this venue. In front of everyone. McGonagall, at Dumbledore's left elbow, had gone very still. Karkaroff, hovering at the edge of the crowd with the expression of a man who has walked in on something he plans to use, was very carefully not saying anything. Madame Maxime, tall as a wall, magnificent in Periwinkle silk, was watching Fleur with an expression Harry couldn't read from this angle. Harry. Hermione appeared on his right. She'd clearly pushed through the crowd and her hair was coming loose from its pins and she was looking between him and Fleur and the visible shimmer still drifting in the air between them with the expression she wore when she encountered something in a textbook that violated her understanding of the world. Are you okay? What do you need? I don't know yet, he said honestly. Do you know what an ancient mate bond is? I know what it is in theory. I've never, she stopped. Looked at Fleur. A complicated thing moved through her expression. I didn't know it was a real thing that activated. I thought it was theoretical. Old magic, preministry, it is very real, Fleur said. I assure you. There was something almost rueful in her voice. She looked at Hermione steadily. Granger, yes. You read. Good. Then you understand what ancient means in a magical context. Pre-Common Era, Hermione said slowly. Older than Hogwarts. Older than the Statute of Secrecy. Older than all of it. And not something that can be legislated away or suppressed with. Fleur stopped. Looked at the visible shimmer still hanging in the air around Harry's hands where they gripped the ice sculpture's neck. With what someone has apparently been doing since he was very small. That landed in the crowd like a stone in a still pond. Harry watched the ripples move, faces changing, people calculating, older students who understood what she was implying reacting first, then younger ones catching up as the people around them explained in urgent whispers. I want to understand what happened, Harry said. He released the swan sculpture and was mildly surprised to find his legs worked. He looked at his hands, they were still faintly luminous, the shimmer clinging to his skin like it hadn't finished yet. He looked up at Dumbledore. I want a real conversation. Tonight. Not scheduled for later, not when the time is right, tonight. Dumbledore studied him for a long moment. Something in the old man's expression shifted, moved through something that might have been grief, or might have been calculation, or might have been both at once, and then he inclined his head. My office, he said. After the ball concludes. Now, Harry said. Ron made the noise again. An hour, Dumbledore said, and the word had the quality of a concession, not a counteroffer. The champions have obligations to their schools tonight. An hour from now. He looked at Fleur, and his voice was very gentle. Mademoiselle Delacour. I wonder if Madame Maxime might, Madame Maxime, said Madame Maxime, appearing behind Fleur with the magnificent certainty of a weather event, will of course accompany her student. She looked at Fleur with dark eyes that were currently doing something much more alert than her usual grandeur suggested. Ma chère. Are you well? I am fine, Fleur said. Automatic. The tone of someone who says I am fine as a first language. Madame Maxime looked at her for a moment longer. She said, which meant nothing and everything. The crowd was still watching. The weird sisters had their instruments down and were watching too, with the particular interested attention of people who understand they may be witnessing something that will be talked about for years. Roger Davies had found his way to a chair and was sitting with the expression of a man who has lost track of the evening and doesn't quite know at what point. Dumbledore turned back to the room with a smile like the sun coming back out. The celebration continues, he said, warm and final. The weird sisters, if you'd be so kind. The music started again. The crowd moved, reluctantly, back to dancing. But Harry could feel the current of it, the whisper network spinning up and accelerating, and he knew that whatever had happened in the last 4 minutes had already escaped into the school and would be in the corridors and the dormitories and the owleries before midnight and in the pages of the Daily Prophet before morning. He stood in the middle of it and felt his own hands, his own actual hands, unblocked and unbound, and tried to understand what he was feeling. The shimmer had faded from his skin. But something else remained, a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with temperature, a kind of presence in his peripheral awareness that hadn't been there before, a compass needle pull in the direction of the silver-robed girl who had turned back to Madame Maxime and was speaking in rapid, low French, her hands moving with the urgency of someone who wants to keep their voice controlled. He didn't hear the words. But he didn't need to. He knew, with a certainty that had no business being this solid at 14 years old, that whatever had started tonight was not finished. Was barely started, in fact. Mate, Ron said, from directly beside him, what just happened? I genuinely have no idea, Harry said. But I'm going to find out. He found Cedric in the side corridor off the Great Hall 20 minutes later, leaning against the wall with 2 cups of punch and the expression of a man who's been thinking hard. Here, Cedric said, offering him one of the cups. You looked like you needed it. Also I sent Cho to dance with her friends because I wanted to talk to you without an audience. Harry took the cup. The punch was good, cold and a little sharp. Thanks. Are you actually all right? The question landed differently from Cedric than it would have from most people. Cedric asked things the way he meant them, with the full weight of actually wanting the answer. My chest feels like someone opened a door in it, Harry said. A big door. In a wall I didn't know was there. Cedric nodded slowly. The shimmer was visible from across the room. I saw it happen. Saw the moment, he paused, choosing his words. I felt something too, when her allure came through. It does that, at Veela events, you feel it like warmth and then it fades. For everyone else it faded. His eyes were steady on Harry. For you it didn't fade. It went the other way. She said blocks. 18 of them. I know. Cedric's voice was careful. Harry, I've heard of mate bonds in theory. My father mentioned them once, in the context of old families and old law. He said, he stopped again. He said they were considered so significant, in old magical culture, that disrupting one was equivalent to, well. The penalties in old law were quite severe. For who? Whoever caused the disruption. Cedric met his eyes. Whoever put those blocks in place. Harry felt the cold, structural anger again. Different from the way he usually felt angry, which was hot and overwhelming and made him say things he regretted. This anger was patient. It would wait. I'm meeting Dumbledore in, he checked the clock over the corridor arch, 40 minutes. I know. I'll walk you up to the tower if you want company as far as the stairs. Cedric paused. Also, Harry. Fleur Delacour is not what everyone thinks she is. What does everyone think she is? Cold. Arrogant. Too beautiful to take seriously. Cedric looked back toward the hall. She isn't. I've trained near her team for 3 months. She works harder than anyone there. And she treats her sister. He nodded toward the Beauxbatons table where a small girl with the same pale gold hair was sitting wide-eyed and alert, the way people should treat their younger siblings, which is to say with genuine ferocity. He looked back at Harry. Whatever this bond is, you could have done worse. I don't even know what the bond means yet, Harry said. No, Cedric agreed. But you will. Hermione found him 10 minutes after that, in the same corridor, now alone. She had a book. Harry did not know how she had found a relevant book within 20 minutes of a magical event occurring. The library was locked, the dormitory was across the castle, but here she was, with a book, and he had long since stopped questioning it. Bonds of the Elder Magic, a compendium, 4th edition, she said, opening to a marked page. Professor Sprout has a copy in her office because of something to do with magical plants, apparently, and the door was open. I knocked. She was lovely, she has shortbread. Hermione. Right. So. Ancient mate bonds. She found the page and tilted the book toward the torchlight. They're not, it's not a romantic concept in origin. It's a magical one. The idea is that occasionally, in a lineage with very specific magical properties, 2 people are born whose cores are complementary in a way that creates, it says here, a resonance of profound sympathetic vibration, in regular words. Their magic recognizes each other. And when it does, it responds. The bond isn't love, it predates love, kind of. It's more like 2 tuning forks at the same frequency. She looked up at him. The Veela element makes sense, actually. Veela magic is extraordinarily old, it predates most wizarding bloodlines. Quarter Veela is usually considered negligible in terms of magical classification, but for a bond event, even a quarter is apparently enough to trigger the recognition. If the other party's magic is, Harry, it says here the bond only activates if the non-Veela party has a magical core of, she read, slowly, precisely. Sufficient depth and resonance to answer the call. In all documented cases, bonded individuals have demonstrated magical capacity of extraordinary and often unprecedented scale. Harry stared at her. Unprecedented, he repeated. Yes. She closed the book. Her voice was very careful. Harry. Those blocks. 18 of them. I've been thinking about it since she said it, and, if your magic is that powerful and it was blocked since you were, when do you think they put them in? I don't know. If it was before Hogwarts, before you were 11, then you've been going through 4 years of magical education with, she stopped. The blocks would have created a ceiling. You'd have been working at maybe a fraction of your actual capacity. Which would explain why you've always managed things you shouldn't technically be able to manage, the Patronus last year, flying as a first year the way you did, survival rates that should be statistically, Hermione. I'm meeting Dumbledore in half an hour. He stopped. Took a breath. The anger was still there, patient and solid. What do I need to know before I walk into that office? She looked at him steadily. Then she opened the book again. The bond cannot be severed, she said. It can be refused, both parties have to consent for it to fully seat, but it can't be undone by a third party once activated. The old texts call it a covenant of magic, not of men. Which means whatever Dumbledore was doing with those blocks, he's now faced with something he cannot control. She looked up. And I think he knows that. What happens if it's refused? She was quiet for a moment. It says there are costs. For both parties. The magic, it's been waiting in both of them, apparently, and once it activates it needs somewhere to go. If it's refused, it doesn't just disappear. She searched the page. It says the individuals experience what it calls the dimming. A gradual attenuation of magical capacity. A kind of loss. It's not fatal, but it's punishment, Harry said. Old magic didn't negotiate, Hermione said quietly. It doesn't punish, exactly, it is what it is. An ancient structure responding to a choice. She closed the book again. Harry. I want you to know something before you go up to that office. He waited. Whatever Dumbledore says, whatever justification he offers, he put 18 blocks on you. On a child. Without your knowledge or consent. I love him, I respect him, I think he's one of the greatest wizards alive, and, her voice was steady, even as her eyes were bright. That was wrong. Whatever his reasons. It was wrong. Harry nodded. He'd already known it. Hearing her say it didn't make it less true or more bearable, but it made him feel less alone with it. I'll go with you, she said. You don't have to. I know. She tucked the book under her arm. Come on. He found Ron waiting at the foot of the main staircase, still in the maroon dress robes, Padma long gone, his expression doing something complicated. I'm not good at this, Ron said, before Harry could speak. At the feelings part. At knowing what to say when something big happens. It's okay. It's not, though. It should be. He looked at Harry with a kind of honest discomfort that was, somehow, exactly the right thing. Are you really okay? Actually? I have no idea, Harry said. But I'm going to find out. Ron nodded slowly. Then he said, she looked terrified, you know. When it happened. Fleur. Under all the magnificent everything. She looked completely terrified. Harry hadn't noticed that. He thought back, reconstructing her face when they'd looked at each other across the room, and he found it, yes. Underneath the composure and the shock and the specific kind of wariness that comes from understanding exactly what has just occurred, yes. Fear. Same as him, then. I'm coming with you, Ron said, falling in beside him and Hermione. I know I'm not, I know I can't help with the Dumbledore bit. But I'm not standing here while you go up there. Harry looked at him for a moment. The anger was still in his chest, and underneath it, something more fragile that needed the company. Yeah, he said. Okay. The gargoyle outside the headmaster's office was expecting them. It leapt aside without Harry having to say the password, which told him something about the state of things, that Dumbledore was ready, and had been thinking very carefully about how this meeting would go. The office was lit with the familiar warmth of a dozen candles, Fawkes on his perch in the corner watching the door with intelligent copper eyes, the instruments on every surface whirring their small private songs. Dumbledore was behind his desk but stood when they entered, all three of them, and he registered Ron and Hermione's presence with a small inclination of his head that acknowledged without objecting. Madame Maxime was already there. She took up a significant portion of the room simply by existing in it. Beside her, in a chair that she had clearly drawn slightly apart from the others, was Fleur. She had removed the silver outer robes and wore only a plain white underdress. Without the formal clothes, without the dancing floor presentation, she looked younger, and more real, Harry thought. More like a person. She had her hands folded in her lap and she was looking at the floor, and when Harry came through the door she looked up, and for one unguarded second before the composure reasserted itself, he saw exactly what Ron had described. Fear. And something else underneath the fear that he didn't have a word for yet. He sat down. "I believe," Dumbledore said, settling himself behind the desk with the careful deliberateness of someone managing a volatile situation, "that this evening has raised certain questions." 18 blocks, Harry said. "That's where we start." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "The instrument's word." Fawkes made a low, musical sound in his throat. "They were placed," Dumbledore said, "in the interest of your safety." "Whose?" "Yours." "The Wizarding World's." "Both." He folded his hands on the desk. "Harry, the power of your magical core has been, since you survived Voldemort's curse as an infant, your magic has been growing in ways that I have had cause, over many years, to believe would attract attention. Dangerous attention. From those who might seek to use you, or fear you, or both." His blue eyes were steady. "The blocks were placed to allow you to develop as normally as possible, without the weight of your full capacity. You blocked him before he could give consent," Madame Maxime said. Her voice was magnificent and flat. "Before he was of age. Without the knowledge of a guardian who could give consent on his behalf. His guardians, at the time, were Muggle," she said. "Yes. Very convenient." The room was very still. "I made a decision," Dumbledore said, and his voice was quiet but unbroken. "I made it believing it was correct. I still believe, I believed," for the first time that evening, something cracked in the measured precision of his speech. "I wanted to protect you, Harry. From the moment your parents were killed. Every decision I have made regarding your life has come from that." "I believe you," Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. "I believe you meant to protect me. I believe that's what you thought you were doing." Harry kept his voice level. The cold anger held him steady. "But you made choices that weren't yours to make. About my power. About my life. And now one of those choices has had consequences you didn't plan for, and," he stopped. Looked at Fleur, and then back. "And someone else is in the middle of it." Fleur looked up sharply at that. He met her eyes. "I don't know what any of this means yet," he said, to her and to the room. "The bond or what I'm supposed to be or, any of it. But I know that I'm owed the truth. All of it." He looked at Dumbledore. "Not the version you decide is appropriate. The actual truth. Tonight." Dumbledore studied him for a long moment. Outside the window, somewhere in the snow, something moved, an owl, probably, wings against the winter dark. Then the old headmaster sat back in his chair, and looked, for the first time Harry could ever remember seeing, genuinely tired. "Very well," he said. And he began. The clock on the tower above struck 2 in the morning before they came down the spiral staircase, Harry and Hermione and Ron, moving in the particular silence of people who have received large amounts of information and not yet finished processing it. At the bottom of the staircase, having apparently waited the entire time without going anywhere, stood Fleur Delacour. Without Madame Maxime, who had made it clear in perfectly civil tones that she and the headmaster still had certain professional matters to address. Without Davies or her Beauxbatons entourage. Just Fleur, leaning against the stone wall, arms folded, chin up, a posture that was either defensive or exhausted or both. Ron made a small sound. Hermione touched his arm and he stopped. Harry looked at Fleur. "Waiting for me?" he said. "Waiting," she said, "to see what happened. Long story." He glanced at Hermione and Ron, then back. "Can I?" He felt strange, asking. Felt strange doing most things right now, stripped of whatever the blocks had been doing that he'd mistaken for just being himself. "Can I talk to you alone? Just for a minute?" Hermione and Ron exchanged a look and then became very interested in the torches further down the corridor. Harry looked at Fleur. She looked at him. They were two people who had never had a real conversation, who had been in each other's peripheral awareness for months, separated by nationality and age and the quiet social architecture of a tournament that had organized them into competitors. Now the architecture was gone. Something old and enormous had reached down and rearranged everything, and here they were in a corridor at 2 in the morning in the ruins of a formal dance. "He confirmed the blocks," Harry said. "Placed when I was 18 months old. Added to over the years." He paused. "He says my power would have made me a target. Made people fear me, come after me, try to use me." He looked at the floor, then back. He might be right. Might have been right. "I don't," he stopped. "I don't know how to be angry about it in the right way yet." Fleur was quiet. "My grandmère," she said, finally, "told me about mate bonds when I was 9. She was full Veela. She told me that in her culture, when the bond activates, it is not a fairy story. It is not love at first sight. It is, she said, it is like being handed a road and being told that this road was made for you and for one other person, and that the road will be hard and real and long, and it will ask everything of you, but it was made for you. It was made for no one else." She uncrossed her arms. Her hands were still. "She also told me it almost never activates in someone's 14th year. I'm not exactly having a normal 4th year," Harry said. Something happened to her face, just briefly, just at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile. The suggestion of one. "No," she said. I've noticed this." They stood in the corridor in the 2 in the morning quiet of the castle. Somewhere above them the ball was winding down, he could hear the distant last notes of music, the shuffle of feet, the bleat of voices. Somewhere ahead of them the tournament was waiting, with its third task still uncompleted, with Voldemort moving in the dark, with everything that Dumbledore had said in that office sitting in Harry's chest alongside the bond and the cold anger and the new, unfamiliar sense of his own power like a room he hadn't known was in his house. "I'm not asking for anything," Harry said. "I know we don't, I know this isn't," he stopped. Tried again. "I don't want you to feel trapped by this. Whatever the bond is. Whatever the cost of refusing it. I don't want you to feel, Potter." Her voice cut across him, not unkind. "Be quiet a moment." He was quiet. She looked at him with those silver-gray eyes, and she looked, not trapped, he thought. Not the look of someone being pushed into something. More like the look of someone who has found a thing unexpected and is deciding, with full deliberateness, what to do about it. "I've spent 3 months at this school," she said, being looked at. "By everyone. All the time. For what I am." She paused. "Not for who. You understand the difference?" "Yeah," he said. "I do. When it happened tonight, when your blocks broke, you did not look at me the way they look at me." She held his gaze. "You looked frightened, and confused, and furious at someone other than me. And you asked me what was happening, not what I was." She held this a moment, like she was deciding whether to continue. "That is not nothing," she said. Harry held her gaze. "No," he said. "It isn't." The castle breathed around them, stone and cold and time. "We should sleep," Fleur said finally. "Both of us. Tomorrow will be—" She stopped. Glanced toward the window at the end of the corridor, the deep blue winter dark beyond it. "Tomorrow will be a great deal." "Yeah," Harry said. She turned to go, and then stopped, just briefly, without turning around. "Potter," she said. "Yeah." "The road," she said. "My Grandmere's road." A pause. "She said it asks everything. She also said that what it gives back," another pause, shorter. "She said she never found a word big enough for what it gives back." She walked away down the corridor, silver white in the torchlight, and she didn't look back. Harry stood there for a long moment. Then he turned around, and Ron was exactly where he'd left him, pretending to examine a torch bracket, and Hermione was beside him pretending she hadn't heard every single word. "Not a word," Harry said. "Absolutely not," Hermione agreed, extremely quickly. "Mate," Ron said, and his voice had something in it that was very close to wonder, "this is genuinely the strangest night of my entire life." "Yeah," Harry said. He looked down at his hands. The shimmer was gone. But the warmth in his chest remained, steady, patient, new, and his magic moved through him like water through a broken dam, finding levels and spaces it had never reached before, filling the shape of who he actually was. He took a breath. He walked toward the stairs. Chapter 2, The Weight of What Was Hidden. Harry woke up different. Not dramatically, no lightning bolt of transformation, no mirror moment where he looked at his reflection and saw a stranger. He just opened his eyes in the gray December morning and lay there in his four-poster with the curtains drawn, and noticed that the world was louder than it had been yesterday. Not literally louder. The dormitory was quiet. It was early enough that Seamus and Dean were still mounds under their blankets, Ron's breathing from the next bed had the slow rhythm of deep sleep, and Neville was somewhere in the middle of a dream that involved him murmuring the names of plants with great urgency. The castle quiet of a winter Sunday. Same as any other. Except Harry could feel the wards. That was new. They sat at the edge of his awareness like the sensation of walls in a dark room, not visible, but there, their presence registering through some sense he didn't have a name for yet. The dormitory wards, the tower wards, the great layered architecture of Hogwarts protection stretching in every direction. He could feel where they were thinner, the window over Dean's bed, some old repair less solid than the original, and where they were almost uncomfortably strong, the foundations, the main gates, the headmaster's tower. He lay there for a while just feeling it, the way you run your tongue over a space where a tooth used to be. Marveling at the shape of the absence. 18 blocks. He kept coming back to it. 18 separate pieces of deliberate magical suppression, layered over his core like, he thought about what Hermione had said, a ceiling, and it wasn't quite right. More like a series of filters, each one cutting some frequency of his magic before it could fully manifest. He'd been working in muted color for 14 years. He hadn't known. You couldn't miss what you'd never had, and the blocks had been there since before he could form memories, and so this wide, open, full sense of himself, of his power sitting in his chest like something warm and solid and enormously patient, this was simply the first time he'd ever been himself. He found he didn't know what to do with that. He also found, before he'd been awake 5 minutes, that he could tell which direction Fleur was. It wasn't intrusive, wasn't like hearing her thoughts or seeing her, nothing so dramatic. More like a warmth in his peripheral awareness, a compass point, present but not demanding. She was somewhere in the castle, northeast of here, still asleep from the quality of it. The bond sense of her was slower and quieter than it had been last night when they'd stood in the corridor. He got up before anyone else woke and dressed in the dim light, and he went down to the common room and sat in the chair nearest the fire and tried to think. The problem with thinking, this particular morning, was that there was too much to think about and most of it connected to everything else in ways that made it hard to find a starting point. Dumbledore had talked for nearly 2 hours in his office. Some of it Harry had already known, the prophecy's existence, the idea of Harry as a symbol, the necessity of his survival in the context of Voldemort's return. Some of it was new and sat badly, like food that tasted fine but felt wrong afterward. The blocks had been placed with the best intentions. The blocks had been maintained with the best intentions. The road to the specific level of hell reserved for good intentions was apparently very well paved. He didn't want to be angry at Dumbledore. That was the strange thing. He understood, he could follow the logic of it, the fear of a child born with too much power walking into a world that would either worship him or try to destroy him for it. He understood the impulse to protect. He'd spent 4 years learning what Dumbledore's version of protection looked like, and it was always, underneath the warmth and the peculiarities and the genuine affection, fundamentally about managing variables. Harry had always been a variable. What he was angry about wasn't the protection. It was being a variable. It was the assumption that he couldn't be trusted with the truth of his own existence. It was 14 years of living inside a ceiling he didn't know was there. It was, and this one sat sharpest, that if Fleur's allure hadn't shattered the blocks last night, they might have just stayed. He might have finished school, fought Voldemort, lived and died or lived and survived, and never once known what he actually was. That thought made the cold anger move. He was still sitting with it, watching the fire, when Ron came downstairs at 8:15 looking terrible and carrying his dress robes in one arm, which he dropped immediately into the nearest chair. "Those robes can stay there until they rot," Ron said, by way of good morning. "How was the rest of the ball?" Harry asked. "Padma found someone better to dance with around 11, which honestly relieved us both. I talked to Fred and George about," he stopped. Dropped into the opposite chair. "Are you all right? You look like you've been up for hours." "A while." Ron studied him. There was something different in the way Ron was looking at him this morning, more careful, more present, less of the half-attention that was the natural currency of two people who'd been friends since they were 11. Last night had changed something between them too, Harry thought. Not badly. Just the recalibration that happens when something real occurs and you see how the other person responds to it. "That thing you did," Ron said. "In the hall. When you told Dumbledore now instead of later." Harry waited. "That was," Ron shook his head slightly. "I've never heard you do that before. Just say it. Like it was obvious." "I was angry." "Yeah, I know. But when you're angry you usually either go completely silent or you explode. That was neither." Ron looked at the fire. "It was like you were just, sure." Harry thought about that. "Maybe I was," he said. "For the first time about something like that." "The blocks?" "The blocks." He paused. "I could feel the wards when I woke up. The school wards. All of them." Ron went very still. "You could feel them?" "Not like, I wasn't walking through them or anything. Just aware of them. Like background noise." He looked at his hands. "Hermione's book said my magical core is," it said, "unprecedented." Ron was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Blimey. Yeah. Does that scare you?" Harry thought about it honestly, the way you can only really think about things before breakfast when the social architecture of the day hasn't fully assembled yet. "Less than it probably should," he said. "Right now it mostly feels like, you know, when you've been wearing shoes that are too small and you finally take them off." Ron looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "That's the least dramatic metaphor for, I might be the most powerful wizard of my generation, I've ever heard. I'm a simple man." Ron laughed, a real one, the short surprised kind, and some of the careful tension in his face eased. "Okay," he said. "Okay. What are we doing today?" What they were doing today, it turned out, was everyone in the school trying to talk to Harry at breakfast. He walked into the great hall and it was immediately clear that the evening's events had accomplished exactly what he'd expected in terms of news spread. The Hufflepuffs nearest the door went quiet and turned in sequence like a falling row of dominoes. The Ravenclaws were more subtle, they looked and then looked away and then leaned toward each other, which was the Ravenclaw version of audible reaction. The Gryffindor table hit him with a wave of attention that was simultaneously more comfortable, because these were his people, and more exhausting, because Gryffindors were constitutionally incapable of being subtle about anything. "Is it true you broke 18 suppression blocks?" Dean asked, before Harry had even sat down. "Something broke them," Harry said. "What does it mean for your magic?" "Like practically. Can you do things you couldn't do before?" "My cousin told me he read once that when blocks come off you get a surge period where you can't control." "Dean," Hermione said, materializing beside Harry with her own plate, "let him have breakfast first." Dean subsided. Seamus gave Harry a look that communicated both genuine concern and a very strong desire to ask approximately 40 additional questions, and managed, impressively, to do neither. The Slytherin table was the one Harry avoided looking at. He caught enough of their general energy, the particular kind of Slytherin attention that catalogued and filed rather than exclaimed, to know that whatever was being calculated over there was more careful and less friendly than the Gryffindor version. Malfoy, he noticed, wasn't looking at him at all. That was more alarming than if he had been. At the Beauxbatons table, Fleur was seated with two of her delegation and eating with the focused efficiency of someone who has a great deal to accomplish today and is treating breakfast as a strategic operation. Her hair was up, her posture was composed, and she did not look toward the Gryffindor table. The compass needle in Harry's chest knew she was aware of him, anyway. He was halfway through eggs and toast when the owl post arrived, and with it, 3 letters bearing the ministry seal, 1 letter in Dumbledore's handwriting on heavy cream parchment, and a copy of the Daily Prophet that Hermione unrolled so fast she knocked over her pumpkin juice. The front page headline had clearly been written by someone who'd gotten an owl from a Hogwarts student around midnight. Ancient mate bond activates at Yule Ball, suppression blocks on boy who lived shattered by Veela Allure under it. In smaller text, ministry sources confirm, the extent of Potter's magical suppression raises serious questions about guardianship decisions. "Oh no," Hermione said. "Oh no good or oh no bad?" Ron said, reading over her shoulder. "Both." She scanned quickly. "They have the basics right, which is worse than if they'd gotten it wrong." Someone in the hall was sending messages before midnight. "The ministry angle is, they're spinning it as a safety concern. Harry's uncontrolled power, the implications of a bond with a foreign national, the tournament," she looked up. "They're going to make this political." "Everything involving me gets political," Harry said. He picked up the letter with his name in Dumbledore's handwriting and opened it. "Harry, please come to my office at your earliest convenience this morning. There are matters we should discuss before the ministry's representative arrives this afternoon. I would strongly suggest bringing Miss Granger. APWBD." He folded the letter and put it in his pocket. The ministry letters were unopened. He looked at them for a moment, feeling the cold anger settle somewhere around his stomach, and then he picked up his toast and took a bite and decided that the ministry could wait until he was finished eating. "What does Dumbledore want?" Ron asked. "Ministry rep coming this afternoon. He wants to talk first." "About what?" Harry thought about last night, the blocks, the bond, the 2 hours in the office, Dumbledore's careful measured voice laying out 14 years of decisions like they were entries in a ledger. He thought about the ancient laws Hermione had read to him from Sprout's book. He thought about the shimmer in the air, visible to 500 people, and the Daily Prophet headline with its very careful phrase, "Serious questions about guardianship decisions." "About the fact that he's in a corner," Harry said. Dumbledore's office, in the daylight of a winter morning, looked the same as it always did, which Harry found mildly irritating. Significant events should leave marks. The instruments whirred, Fawkes drowsed, the portraits of previous headmasters dozed in their frames, and behind his desk Dumbledore sat with a pot of tea and a plate of biscuits and the expression of a man constructing a very specific kind of conversation. McGonagall was there too, standing near the window with her arms folded, which Harry read as, "She knows, she's been talking to Dumbledore, and she's not happy." Harry sat down. Hermione sat beside him and produced, from somewhere in her robes, the copy of Bonds of the Elder Magic with about 6 additional bookmarks in it that hadn't been there last night. Dumbledore looked at the book and something moved briefly through his expression. "You've been researching," he said. "Always," Hermione said pleasantly. "Then you understand something of the legal dimension." "The Elder Laws," Hermione said. "Pre-Ministry. Still technically enforceable because the Ministry never formally struck them, they just stopped acknowledging them." Which means they're dormant but valid," Dumbledore said. "Yes." He folded his hands. "The Ministry representative arriving this afternoon is a senior undersecretary named Ophelia Vance. She is competent, politically sophisticated, and primarily interested in ensuring that this situation does not become embarrassing for the Ministry." "Why would it be embarrassing for the Ministry?" Harry asked. "Because the Ministry was aware of the blocks." Harry looked at him. "Not all of them," Dumbledore said. "I placed 12. The Ministry placed the other 6. They were placed," he paused, choosing his words. "There is a category of wizard, Harry, that the Ministry has historically found difficult. Individuals whose power levels, if publicly known, create a particular kind of social instability." "A kind of fear," McGonagall said, from the window. Her voice was tight. "What Albus means is that you were flagged before your first birthday as a level 7 magical entity, which is a classification the Ministry keeps private because public knowledge of level 7s tends to result in exactly the kind of attention that makes their lives very dangerous." Harry processed this. Level 7. "The scale runs to 7, Dumbledore said quietly. Harry looked at Hermione. She was looking at her book with an expression of intense concentration that meant she'd already known this or had deduced it and was deciding what to say. "The last level 7 on record," she said, carefully, "was Merlin." The office was very quiet. "Right," Harry said. He heard how flat his own voice was. "And the Ministry decided the correct response to a child being born at level 7 was to block him and not tell him. The Ministry's response to most things it fears," McGonagall said, "is to control it and not tell anyone." "Minerva," Dumbledore said. "I am simply being accurate, Albus." She turned from the window. Her eyes on Harry were complicated, the fierceness he knew, and underneath it something older, something that looked like it might be guilt. "I was aware of your blocks, Harry. Not the full extent of them, but aware. I want you to know that." Harry held her gaze. He'd always known, in the background of himself, that McGonagall was on his side. This was the first time he understood there were layers to what that had cost her. "I know," he said. And meant it, not as absolution, but as acknowledgement. There would be time for everything else later. Dumbledore reached into his desk and produced a folder of heavy parchment. "Before Undersecretary Vance arrives, there are several things we should address. The first is the bond itself." He looked at Harry steadily. "I want to be clear, I did not anticipate this. The blocks were not designed to prevent a mate bond activation, I did not consider it a realistic possibility. The bond exists independently of anything I did or the Ministry did, and it is beyond anyone's power to undo." He paused. "You have the right to refuse it. Both you and Mademoiselle Delacour must consent for the full activation to complete, and refusal is a choice the bond will honor." "At a cost," Hermione said. "At a cost," Dumbledore agreed. "A gradual diminishment of magical capacity. For both parties. Old magic," he opened a hand briefly. "Old magic has no concept of negotiation." "I'm not refusing it," Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. "Harry, you're 14 years old. The bond is real, and it is permanent, and, I'm not refusing it," Harry said again. "I'm not saying it's decided. I'm saying I'm not starting from a position of trying to get out of it. He met the headmaster's eyes. And I'd rather not have this conversation without Fleur. She's part of this. She should be here. McGonagall made a short sound that might have been approval. Dumbledore considered for a moment. Then he sent a note with Fawkes. The phoenix spread his crimson wings and was gone and back in less than 3 minutes, which said something about the distances within the castle being slightly more flexible than architecture suggested, and 5 minutes later there was a knock at the door. Fleur came in alone. She had exchanged the white underdress of last night for her regular Beauxbatons robes, pale blue and precise, and her hair was up. She took in the room in one quick sweep, registered Harry, registered the others, and sat down in the chair beside him with the deliberateness of someone who has decided where they stand and intends to stand there. "Thank you for coming," Dumbledore said. "You sent a phoenix," she said. "I thought it might be important." They talked for nearly 2 hours. It was not a comfortable 2 hours, but it was a real one, the kind of conversation that moved like a fast river, hitting rocks and redirecting, Hermione providing citations from her borrowed book at key moments, Fleur asking pointed questions in a precise English that Harry was beginning to understand was a deliberate choice on her part rather than a limitation. Dumbledore explaining the political landscape with the practiced fluency of someone who had been navigating it for 60 years. The Ministry, Dumbledore explained, would not attempt to separate them. The elder laws were too clearly applicable, and attempting to breach them would create a legal firestorm that no Ministry career could survive. What they would attempt to do was manage the situation. Manage public narrative, manage access, potentially manage Harry's new magical capabilities through a different mechanism than the blocks, something consensual, something they could point to as responsible oversight. "No," Harry said, when Dumbledore got to that part. "Harry, the concern is legitimate. A sudden removal of 18 blocks releases a great deal of, I know what it releases. I can feel it." He kept his voice level. "And I'm not going back in a box because the Ministry is frightened of what I am. I've been in a box for 14 years. I'm not." The cold anger moved. "No." Fleur looked at him. He looked back. Something passed between them, not the bond exactly, not yet, not in any fully developed way, but an understanding. A recognition. She gave the smallest nod, quick and definite. "The Allure," Fleur said, turning back to Dumbledore. "They will try to use what appeared as a reason to restrict Veela attendance at Ministry-sanctioned events. They've tried this before. The argument will be that my presence that I was irresponsible." "It's possible they'll make that argument," Dumbledore said carefully. "Then they will be lying," she said. "My allure was controlled. It was precisely calibrated. What happened was not caused by an excess of my allure, it was caused by the instability of his blocks. When an external magical presence encountered a suppressed bond of this magnitude, the blocks, they did not simply hold. They catastrophically failed." She paused. The correct comparison would be blaming a river for flooding a dam that was already cracked. Hermione made a small involuntary sound that was approximately exactly. "That is a more accurate account than the Ministry will prefer," Dumbledore said. "Truth often is," Fleur said. Harry was watching her. She was good at this, the formal political maneuvering, the precise defensive framing, and she did it without apparent effort, the same way she did most things, with a kind of natural authority that had nothing to do with arrogance and everything to do with having been prepared for it. He thought about what Cedric had said, "She works harder than anyone." He was beginning to understand that the cold composure everyone mistook for superiority was, in part, the result of perpetual preparation. She knew she would always be underestimated. She had simply decided to be too prepared for that to matter. He found he respected it enormously. "What do we do about this afternoon?" he asked Dumbledore. "I will handle Under-Secretary Vance. I would prefer, if possible, that you are not in the room." "I want to be in the room," Harry said. "Harry, I want to hear what they say. About me. I'm done with people making decisions about me in rooms I'm not in." He looked at the headmaster steadily. You understand why? Dumbledore held his gaze for a long moment. Then he sat back. Very well, he said. You may attend. A pause. I would suggest, however, that you say very little. Let me manage the conversation. Fine, Harry said. As long as you're actually managing it in my interests and not the ministry's. A slight pause. Of course, Dumbledore said. The undersecretary arrived at 3 in the afternoon, and she was nothing like Harry had expected. Ophelia Vance was about 60, with short silver hair and the compact, precise bearing of someone who had spent a great many years in rooms full of people who underestimated her and had found ways to find this useful. She wore ministry robes but wore them the way very senior civil servants wear uniforms, less I represent this institution and more this institution represents me. She had a leather folder under one arm and she shook Dumbledore's hand and said something courteous and then her eyes moved to Harry and stayed there for exactly 1 second before moving on to Fleur, who was seated beside Harry, and Madame Maxime, who was in the corner performing her function of occupying a large portion of the room's symbolic space. Mr. Potter, Vance said, when the introductions had been done. I imagine last night was quite startling. Interesting choice of word, Harry said. She looked at him again. A real look this time, not the cataloging kind. Something recalibrated behind her eyes. Quite, she said. She sat down and she opened her folder and she was, Harry had to acknowledge, very good. She presented the ministry's position in terms that made it sound reasonable, concern for Harry's well-being, interest in a smooth transition from suppressed to unblocked magical expression, a desire to ensure the Triwizard Tournament continued without disruption, a perfectly natural institutional interest in understanding the nature and implications of the activated bond. Harry listened to all of it without expression. What he was actually listening for was the thing underneath the reasonable presentation, the real architecture of what the ministry wanted. He found it about 20 minutes in, when Vance made a small aside about the importance of managed communication regarding Harry's new capabilities and used the phrase in everyone's interests. There it was. They were afraid of him. Not of Voldemort, not primarily. Voldemort was a fear they'd been living with for years and had developed a bureaucratic relationship with, a set of official positions and deniable acknowledgements. Harry is level 7, Harry unblocked, Harry with a mate bond to a quarter Veela and a set of elder law protections that predated the ministry's authority, that was a new fear, a structural one. They wanted to manage the narrative. And managing the narrative meant managing Harry. And managing Harry meant, one way or another, putting the ceiling back on. He waited until Vance finished her presentation and then he said, very quietly, the answer is no. She looked at him. To the voluntary management framework, the communication management protocols, and the supervised transition period, he said. No. The elder laws protect the integrity of a mate bond and its parties from third-party interference. I read that this morning. He glanced at Hermione. We both did. Hermione produced the book and opened to the appropriate page with the precision of someone who had been waiting for this exact moment. Vance looked at the book. Then at Harry. Then at Dumbledore, who had the expression of a man watching something he'd started and is no longer fully controlling. Mr. Potter, Vance said, you are 14 years old. I know. And I'm a level 7 magical entity with an activated mate bond, and the elder laws are very clear about what that means in terms of your authority to, I believe the text says, he looked at Hermione. Intervene in, restrict, or place conditions upon, Hermione read, the natural expression of a bonded individual's magical capacity. She looked up. Conditions placed prior to activation are rendered void upon the activation of the bond. She closed the book. Which means the blocks are gone and the ministry has no legal mechanism to replace them. Vance was silent for a moment. The legal question is not straightforward, she said finally. The elder laws exist in a contested state with contemporary, then contest them, Harry said. In the Wisengamot. Publicly. He held her gaze. I'd like that very much, actually. A public hearing about why the ministry placed suppression blocks on an infant and maintained them for 14 years without consent. I think the wizarding public would find that very interesting. The silence that followed had a different quality from the previous ones. Vance looked at him. She looked for a long time, and Harry held the look without flinching, and in her expression he watched something shift, not warmth, not concession, but a kind of professional respect, the acknowledgement of a skilled opponent. "You've grown up," she said, finally. "Had help," he said. She looked at Fleur. Then back at Harry. "I will need to discuss this with senior ministry officials," she said. She stopped. Collected herself. "There are perspectives that need to be, of course," Dumbledore said smoothly. "We appreciate the ministry's thoughtful approach to, Dumbledore," Harry said. The headmaster stopped. "Thank you. I can handle it from here." He looked at Vance. "I'll be in the castle if the ministry has further questions. But if those questions come with additional blocks or restrictions attached, I'll be answering them with a legal representative present." He paused. "I believe Madame Bone's office would be an appropriate contact, given her reputation for actual fairness." Vance looked at him for one more long moment. "Good afternoon, Mr. Potter," she said. And she left. Afterward, Madame Maxime announced that Fleur needed rest and shepherded her out before anyone had quite processed the ending. Dumbledore sat for a long moment in the aftermath looking at Harry with an expression that Harry couldn't entirely read, something between pride and chagrin and the particular sorrow of watching something U-shaped develop will of its own. "Madame Bones," he said, eventually. "Good choice?" Harry asked. "An excellent choice, in fact. She is the most genuinely fair person in the ministry." A pause. "I had not considered her as a contact. I've been thinking about who in the ministry I could trust since last year," Harry said. "The list is short. She's on it." McGonagall, by the window, made a sound that was unmistakably a suppressed laugh. Dumbledore looked at Harry steadily. "You're different," he said. "Not accusatory. More like a man looking at a map and noting that a road has moved." "Yes," Harry said. "Are you angry with me?" Harry considered the question with the care it deserved. Outside the window the winter sky had gone the dark gold of a short December afternoon, the light low and long, and the grounds were empty in the cold. "I don't know yet," he said, which was honest. "I think I will be, at some point, in a way that's going to need a real conversation. But right now he searched for the word. I'm mostly busy being who I actually am. There's a lot to figure out." Dumbledore held his gaze. Something in the old face, the blue eyes, the extraordinary gravity of the man, shifted into something more unguarded than Harry had ever seen from him. "I am sorry," Dumbledore said. "For what it's worth. I am genuinely, deeply sorry." "I know," Harry said. He found Fleur in the library. Not the main library, the small reading room off the east wing that most students didn't know existed, a narrow space with high shelves and a single long table and windows that looked out over the frozen lake. She was at the far end of the table with a stack of books and a parchment covered in her handwriting, and she looked up when he came in with an expression that was neither surprised nor particularly welcoming but not unwelcoming either. Neutral. Waiting. He sat down across from her without asking, because asking felt like the wrong register for what they were. "How are you feeling?" he said. "Like myself," she said. "Which is," she paused. "The allure this morning is harder to manage than usual. Since last night." She returned to her parchment. "It will stabilize. It appends during bond activation, the Veela elements become more active before they recalibrate." "Is it uncomfortable?" She looked up at that. Something flickered. "It is not something I enjoy losing control of," she said. "No. I can imagine." He rested his arms on the table. "The bond's been, I can tell which direction you are. All morning." "Is that, yes?" I can tell which direction you are as well. She said it matter-of-factly, but her pen had stopped moving. It is the first stage of bond development. It will become more specific before it becomes less intrusive. According to the literature. You've been reading up too. I've known about mate bonds theoretically since I was 9. I've spent this morning reading everything in this library that is practically applicable. She looked at him steadily. I like to be prepared. Yeah, he said. I noticed. Something small and complicated moved through her expression. Not displeasure. More like, surprise at being noticed. What else, Ave, you noticed, she said. It didn't come out like a flirtation, exactly. More like a genuine question, asked from behind a small amount of defensiveness, the tone of someone who wants to know the answer but reserves the right to not like it. That you ask questions differently than you talk, Harry said. When you're asking something real, your accent comes through more. When you're performing composure it's less. She was very still. That's not a criticism, he said quickly. I know, she said. I haven't decided what it is yet. A beat. What did the ministry want? To put me back in a box. Friendlier box, better upholstery, but still a box. And? I said no. He paused. It helps, apparently, that elder law protects us both from third-party interference now. The bond is useful for something right out of the gate. She made a sound, short, dry, not quite a laugh but adjacent to it. You used the bond as a legal defense. Hermione used it. I just agreed loudly. This time it was closer to a laugh. She looked back down at her parchment, but the set of her shoulders had shifted. I spoke to Madame Maxime this morning, she said, after a moment. She is not opposed to this. The bond. She is cautious because she cares about what is best for me, but she is not opposed. A pause. She likes you, I think. Or she likes what you did in the hall. Yelling at Dumbledore. Not bowing down, she said. He thought about that. Outside the window the lake was a vast grey plain of ice, and the late afternoon light was turning everything amber and cold, and somewhere underneath the ice the mere people were going about their business unaware of or indifferent to the events of the night before. I need to ask you something, he said. She looked up. The bond, the refusal option. The cost of it. He held her gaze. I told Dumbledore I wasn't planning to refuse it. But that was my choice, not ours. And I should ask what you want. What you actually want. Not the situation, not the law, not Madame Maxime's careful approval. What you want. She held his gaze for a very long time. Outside, the wind moved across the frozen lake and the ice didn't move at all. I want, she said, finally, carefully, to not be chosen because of what I am. Her voice was quiet and precise. I've been, she stopped. People look at me and they see the allure, the beauty, the Veela blood. They don't look for anything else because they don't think there is anything else. Another pause, shorter, harder. My first fear, last night, was not the bond. It was that you would, that when I looked at you and you looked at me, it would be because of the allure. That it would be another person responding to what I am instead of. She stopped. I wasn't, Harry said. I wasn't responding to the allure. What I was feeling was the blocks breaking. That was completely separate. I know that now. She paused. I didn't know it then. What do you want? He said again. Not what you're afraid of. What you actually want. She looked at him, and for a moment the composure went entirely, not the frightened version from last night, something more deliberate, a chosen openness, a testing of something. I want to find out, she said. Who you are. Actually are. Not Potter the champion or Potter the boy who lived or Potter the level 7 magical entity. She paused. I want to know if you are someone worth choosing. Without the bond telling me the answer. A beat. And I want to be someone worth choosing. In the same way. Harry held that. Okay, he said. Okay, she agreed. Not a promise. Not a declaration. A starting point, agreed to in a small library above a frozen lake on the afternoon after the strangest night of either of their lives. The third task, Harry said. Whenever it is. Whatever it involves. He paused. You'll still be competing. I'll still be competing. I'm not assuming, of course not, she said. We are still in a tournament. I intend to win it. Her chin came up, and that was the Fleur he'd known from a distance, precise and brilliant and unapologetic. I expect you intend the same. Yeah, he said. But I'd rather we both got out alive. She looked at him. Something in her expression did a complicated, quiet thing. Yes, she said. Me too. That night Harry sat on his bed and held out his hand in the dark and asked his magic to show him what it could do. He didn't have a wand. He'd left it on the nightstand. He just held out his hand and asked, the way you ask a question you already know the answer to, and the answer was light, not a spark, not a flicker, but a sustained warm glow that settled in his palm like something that had always lived there and had simply been waiting to come home. He sat with it for a long time, the light in his palm and the bond's quiet compass in his chest, and he thought about the road Fleur's grandmother had described, hard and real and long, and asking everything, and giving back something there was no word big enough for. He closed his hand. The light went out. He lay back on his pillow in the dark and he breathed, and for the first time in a very long time, maybe for the first time ever, the world he was living in felt like it had been built to fit him. Chapter 3, Negotiations at midnight. 3 days after the Yule Ball, Harry walked into Charms and every conversation in the room stopped like someone had cut a wire. He'd gotten used to this in a general sense, the staring had been a feature of his life since he was 11, but this was different. Before, the staring had the quality of looking at a landmark, a known thing in a known place. Now it had the quality of looking at something that had changed overnight and trying to reconcile the new version with the old memory. He could feel the adjustment happening in people in real time, the recalibration, and it was exhausting in a way that the old staring hadn't been. He sat down. Flitwick started class. Harry took notes and performed the charms and answered questions when called on, and he did all of it with the specific competence of someone who has spent 3 months of a school year performing at roughly 60% of their actual ability and is now, without announcement, performing at full capacity. He didn't try to show off. He didn't need to. The charms simply worked, immediately and precisely, and Flitwick went pink with excitement and made a note in his register and glanced at Harry 3 times in the following 10 minutes with the expression of a man revising several long-held assessments. After class, Flitwick asked him to stay behind. Your charms work this term, Flitwick said, climbing down from his stack of books, has been excellent. Above average. Competent. He paused. What I witnessed this morning is something else entirely. He looked up at Harry with his bright eyes. Are you well? Are you comfortable? The transition from a suppressed magical state can be physically demanding. I feel fine, Harry said. Better than fine. Flitwick was quiet a moment, looking at something Harry couldn't see, or possibly at the general concept of Harry as a new problem to be appropriately accommodated. I would suggest, he said carefully, that you speak with Professor McGonagall about your academic situation. Some adjustments may be warranted. And, Harry. He paused. Do be patient with your fellow students. What you are now is not what they expected. People need time to update their understanding. A beat. Even people who care about you. Harry thought about Ron at breakfast that morning, trying so visibly to be normal, to be exactly the same as always, and succeeding about 80% of the time, which was a genuine effort. He thought about the 20%. Yeah, he said. I know. Ron's 20% emerged properly in the common room that evening. They'd been playing chess, or what had been chess, but was increasingly less like chess and more like Ron mechanically dismantling Harry's pieces while Harry's mind was clearly elsewhere. Ron moved his queen and Harry's knight exploded and Harry didn't react. "You're not even watching," Ron said. "Sorry. I was thinking. About Fleur." "Not quite a question." Harry looked at him. "Among other things." Ron moved a pawn. Took it back. Put it somewhere else. His jaw had a set to it that Harry recognized as the precursor to a real conversation, the physical preparation that Ron did when he was about to say something that mattered to him. "I'm not jealous," Ron said. "I want to say that first." "Okay. Of the bond, or her, or, I'm not jealous of any of it." He looked at the board. "But I do feel, I don't know how to say this without it sounding wrong." "Try anyway." Ron looked up. You've always been Harry. My mate Harry. And I've always been the one who knew you best, or one of the ones. And now there's all this," he waved a hand vaguely, encompassing apparently everything that had occurred in the last 3 days. "There's all this stuff about you that I didn't know. That nobody knew. And you're changing, like, visibly changing, and he stopped. "She's part of that. And I don't know where I fit." Harry was quiet for a moment. "Ron," he said. "You're the reason I know what it's like to have an actual friend. Not people who tolerate me or study me or protect me. An actual friend. That doesn't have a different version of itself because I'm unblocked." He paused. "You fit exactly where you always have." Ron looked at the board. His jaw relaxed. "She's going to be a permanent fixture, isn't she?" he said. "Not unhappily. Just the tone of someone updating their mental furniture." "I don't know what she's going to be yet," Harry said honestly. "We've had about 2 real conversations." "She told Hermione today that your chess opening is predictable," Ron said. Harry stared at him. "She was watching me play chess. Hermione mentioned it, apparently. In passing." Ron moved his queen with the ease of someone repositioning the subject. "She also said you were too aggressive in the middle game. From a distance. She analyzed my chess game from across the library." "Your queen," Ron said, and obliterated it. On the 4th day, the owls started arriving. Not the normal post had been elevated since the Prophet article, but Harry had been filtering those, opening the ones that looked like actual letters and binning the ones that felt like they were from journalists or political opportunists. He'd gotten reasonably efficient at it. These were different. These came with ministry seals he didn't recognize, with Gringotts stamps, with letterheads in Latin and French and one in what he was fairly sure was very old Gaelic. Hermione fell on the Gaelic one with the expression of someone receiving an early Christmas present. "This is from the Potter's family vault manager," she said, halfway through translating. "Harry, do you know you have a family vault?" "I thought I had a vault." "You have a vault. At Gringotts. The number you know, that's your trust vault. Your parents' money from your childhood, kept accessible." She looked up. "Your family vault is separate. It's been sealed pending your magical majority, which, Harry, the removal of the blocks counts. The Gringotts magical assessment apparently registered the block removal automatically and," she stopped. "Reread the letter. They want you to come in. They say there are items in the family vault that activate on magical majority and that you should be informed of several points of law pertaining to the Potter family line." "What kind of items?" Ron asked, leaning over her shoulder. "It doesn't say specifically. It says," she traced a line of text carefully. "Ancient instruments of designation, letters of record from the deceased heads of the Potter family line, and documents pertaining to certain inherited status designations." She looked up. "Harry. The Potter family is an ancient and noble house." The fire crackled. Outside the common room window, snow was starting again, small and steady. "Is that," is that significant? Harry said. It means you have a seat on the Wisengamot. By hereditary right. She set the letter down. It means you have political standing that is completely independent of the ministry. It means, she stopped, clearly organizing a great many thoughts. It means Vance knew exactly what she was walking into the other day and chose not to mention it. Of course she did, Harry said. He picked up the Gringotts letter and read it again. The print was formal and precise, goblins having a relationship with written language that treated every letter as a contract. He thought about his parents. He thought about them in the abstract way he always had to, no real memories, just the photographs, the few stories, the sense of people who had existed and mattered and been taken. He thought about them putting things away for him. Setting things in order before the end, or maybe years before the end, on a quiet afternoon when the end was theoretical and life was present. He folded the letter carefully. Can we go to Gringotts over Christmas? He said. If you're staying for Christmas, Hermione said. I am now. The letter from France arrived on day 5. It was addressed to Fleur, not Harry, but he knew about it because Fleur told him herself, in the library reading room that had become, by some unspoken mutual agreement, a regular meeting point. She was there when he arrived, the letter on the table in front of her, and she didn't say anything when he sat down, just pushed it toward him. It was from Beauxbatons. From the school's board of governors, specifically, which told him something about the level of institutional concern. It was written in French, courteous, formal, dense with the particular kind of careful language that carries threat in the white space between sentences. He couldn't read it fluently enough, but he got the architecture of it. They want you to come home, he said. They are requesting that I give serious consideration to completing the remainder of the tournament year from France, attending only the required task events. She said it without inflection, which meant she'd been through the emotional part earlier and had arrived at the clinical stage. The bond is a complication, in their view. A potential source of distraction and political exposure for the school. Can they make you go? No. I am of age. My participation in the tournament is contractual and cannot be withdrawn without my consent. She looked at the letter. But they can make life very difficult. Withdraw certain supports. Communicate to future employers that I was problematic during my placement year. A pause. In France, in the wizarding community, Beauxbatons connections matter very much. So they're threatening your career. They are diplomatically suggesting that my cooperation would be mutually beneficial. She looked up. Which is the same thing. Harry was quiet for a moment. Through the window the snow had stopped and the lake was a flat white disk under a low gray sky and everything was very still. Are you going to cooperate? He said. What do you think? She said. He looked at her. The chin was up, the spine straight, the eyes steady. The composure was real today, not performed. She'd made a decision and the decision had calmed her. No, he said. No, she agreed. What will you do? I am writing a response tonight that will be very polite and very firm and will cite the elder laws, the tournament contract, and several points of European wizarding rights law that Madame Maxime found for me this morning. She paused. Madame Maxime is, quietly, on my side. She cannot say so publicly. But she gave me the relevant statutes. Harry looked at the letter, then at Fleur. Does this keep happening? He asked. People trying to manage this? For however long this lasts. Yes, she said. Probably. She held his gaze. Are you surprised? No. Just, he stopped. I wanted to know if you were prepared for it. I've been preparing for people to try to manage me since I was 12 and the Veela blood became visible, she said. This is simply a new category of the same problem. He nodded slowly. Are you prepared for it? She said. Not challenging. Genuinely asking. Harry thought about the last 5 days, the ministry visit, the Gringotts letter, the owls, the staring in corridors, Flitwick's careful suggestion about patience with his peers, the cold structural anger that was becoming less urgent as it became more permanent, a fixture rather than a crisis. Getting there, he said. She studied him for a moment. Then she picked up the letter and folded it. I am going to the Ollery, she said. Walk with me. The castle after dinner was a different world from the castle during the school day, quieter, dimmer, the great stone corridors finding their natural state of cold grandeur without the noise of 500 students to warm them up. Their footsteps were the loudest thing going up the West Tower stairs, and the wind off the battlements hit them at the top like a blunt instruction, cold and direct and immediate. The Ollery smelled of feathers and straw and the particular cold outside smell of birds who didn't care about temperature. Hedwig found Harry immediately and came down for attention, which he gave, and Fleur sent her letter with a large tawny that belonged to Beauxbatons, and they stood in the stone doorway afterward while the owl shrank to a dot over the white grounds. Tell me something about yourself, Fleur said. Not looking at him. Looking out at the grounds. He thought about it. Not the obvious things, she knew those, everyone knew those, they were public property. Something real. I don't actually remember my parents, he said. Not, I was 15 months old. I have no actual memories. But sometimes I'll do something, the way I hold a quill, or the way I laugh at something specific, and someone will say that's your father or that's your mother, and he stopped. I don't know what to do with that. Being made of people I can't remember. She was quiet. My father, she said, after a moment, is full human. He knew what my mother was before he married her. He chose it, chose her, chose everything that came with her. A pause. When I was small, other children were frightened of my grand mire. The full Veela thing, it is more than the allure, there are other aspects, when Veela are threatened, that are, alarming. She said it plainly, no apology in it. My father never was. Not once. He would look at her and he would just see her. She looked at her hands on the stone window ledge. I always wanted someone to look at me that way. Just see me. Not the allure, not the strangeness. Just me. Harry held that. How do you know, he said carefully, when someone's seeing you and not the allure? She looked sideways at him. It has a different quality. The allure makes people, she considered the word. Dazed. Soft. Unfocused. Like dreaming. A pause. You have never looked at me like that. I don't feel dazed around you, Harry said. I know. Something complicated moved through her expression. It is both reassuring and slightly annoying. He laughed before he could stop it, a real one, quick and surprised, and she looked at him sharply and then the corner of her mouth went up. The bond, she said, when the laughter had settled, does not make someone immune to the allure. But it does, it creates a different channel. The allure is like a fire in a room. Normally it fills the space. With a bonded person, the fire is still there but there is also a window. Another source of light. The allure becomes ambient instead of total. That's a good description. I've been thinking about it for 5 days. She looked back out at the grounds. Potter. You can call me Harry, he said. We've been through a lot for Potter. She paused, as if considering whether the transaction was appropriate. Harry. It came out with the French in it, the H softer, and he found it did something quite specific to his chest that had nothing to do with the bond. I should tell you something about the second task. He looked at her. What about it? The clue. Come seek us where our voices sound. I solved it weeks ago. I add the advantage of my Grand Mire's knowledge, certain things about magical underwater communication. I know what the task involves. She looked at him steadily. They take something from you. Something you will miss. Something dear to you. A pause, freighted. Before last night, before all of this, I knew what my hostage would most likely be. Gabrielle, Harry said. She is heir for the Christmas holidays. She stays for the ball, for the new year, a pause. She is heir. And she is the person I would miss most. She held his gaze. But since the bond activation, I've been wondering whether the magic that determines the hostages would now register something different. Someone different. Harry understood what she was not quite saying. The bond was old magic and the task used old magic, and old magic had a tendency to be literal in ways that were deeply inconvenient. It might take me, he said. It might take you, she said. Or it might still take Gabrielle. I don't know. But I thought you should know that I was thinking about it. That I am, she stopped. The composure went slightly at the edges. She is 8 years old, Harry. And she adores this place. She follows me everywhere and asks me about the castle and the food and the classes and, her voice tightened. If she is the hostage and she is underwater and she is afraid, I'll get her out, Harry said. Immediate. No hesitation. She looked at him. However it falls, he said. I promise. If she's a hostage, I'll get her out. Same as I'd get anyone out. He held her gaze. Okay. The composure came back, but it came back differently, not as a defense. More like a deep breath. Something settled. Okay, she said. Quiet and real. The problem revealed itself 11 days into January. Harry had been working on his wandless magic in increasingly dedicated sessions, an hour each morning before breakfast in an unused classroom on the 3rd floor, door locked, working through exercises that Hermione had found in a book about advanced magical development that she'd requested through Interlibrary OWL from a specialist archive in Edinburgh. The exercises were methodical and strange, about finding the relationship between intention and output without the mediation of a wand, and it was absorbing and frustrating and periodically exhilarating. On the 11th day of January, he was in the middle of one of these sessions when the classroom door opened. He hadn't locked it. Which was either his own carelessness or the castle's, because the figure in the doorway was not Hermione or Ron or anyone else from his usual company. It was Draco Malfoy, flanked by Crabbe and Goyle but slightly ahead of them, and he had the expression he wore when he had decided something in advance of arriving somewhere. Harry lowered his hand. The wandless light he'd been sustaining guttered out. Wandless work, Malfoy said, looking at the space where the light had been. That's new. Did you want something? Harry said. Malfoy stepped into the room. Crabbe and Goyle stayed at the door with the instinct of people who had learned, over years, when the situation called for their presence and when it called for their absence. Malfoy pushed the door mostly closed behind him. Harry watched him come across the room with the wary attention he'd had for Malfoy since first year. But Malfoy was different from what Harry expected. No sneer exactly, no performance. The face was arranged in something closer to calculation, and underneath the calculation was something Harry hadn't seen from him before, something that looked uncomfortably like unease. The blocks, Malfoy said. My father told me about them. Not all of it, but he knew they existed. Of course he did, Harry said. He's not, Malfoy stopped. The jaw tightened. He has opinions about what your unblocking means. About what level 7 means. Politically. His eyes were flat and precise. He wrote to me last week. He wants me to report on anything I notice. Your capabilities, your relationships, Malfoy, Harry said. Why are you telling me this? The question landed. Malfoy's expression did something Harry had never seen it do before, moved through about 3 different things in rapid succession, including one that looked almost like vulnerability, and settled on something careful and factual. Because, Malfoy said, I am not, he stopped again. Started differently. You're level 7. You've got an ancient bond. You've got elder law protections and a Gringotts file that probably goes back to the Founders' era. And in 6 months, his voice lowered. Something's coming. I've been watching my father. I know when he's preparing for something. He held Harry's gaze. I'm not telling you whose side I'm on. I'm not making some dramatic declaration. I'm just telling you that someone in the right position told me to spy on you, and I'm telling you they told me, and that's all I'm doing. Harry looked at him for a long moment. Why? He said again, differently. Malfoy looked away, at the window, the snow outside, the empty grounds. His voice when it came back was so quiet it almost wasn't there. I don't want to be on the wrong side of whatever this is, he said. I've seen what happens to people on the wrong side of things involving you. I'm being, he picked the word with visible deliberateness. Practical. Harry held the silence. I'm not going to pretend we're friends, Harry said finally. I'm not asking you to. But if you give me real information, real, useful information, not politics, not your father's agenda, I'll hear it. He paused. And I won't tell anyone where it came from. Malfoy looked at him. Something passed through the grey eyes, the specific discomfort of someone who has offered a thing and had it accepted on terms they didn't fully plan for. The Ministry is more frightened than they showed Vance's visit, Malfoy said. My father has contacts in 3 departments. They are actively seeking precedents to argue against the Elder Law's applicability to contemporary situations. They want to find a way to argue the block's removal is reversible. It isn't, Harry said. The bond, I know. But the Ministry doesn't need to be right. They need to create enough legal noise that the question stays open while they figure out what else to do. He paused. There's something about the tournament. Something about the 3rd task. My father is connected to whoever designs the tasks at the Ministry level, and the conversations he's been having. He stopped. I don't know the details. But he is very interested in the 3rd task. The cold in Harry's chest was not temperature. Keep listening, Harry said. Malfoy nodded. One short, precise movement. Malfoy, Harry said, as the other boy moved back toward the door. He stopped. Whatever's coming, whatever your father is preparing for, Harry held his gaze. You can still choose. You know that. Malfoy's expression went through something quick and complicated and closed. Get back to your wandless work, Potter, he said, and opened the door and left. Harry stood alone in the classroom for a long moment after the footsteps faded. Then he sat down on the nearest desk and thought very carefully about everything. He found Fleur that evening in their reading room and told her. He hadn't planned to tell her specifically. He'd been going to tell Hermione first, build an organized account, present it properly. But he walked past the reading room on his way to Gryffindor Tower and saw the light under the door, and knocked, and she looked up from her books and he sat down and told her without preamble. She listened without interrupting, which was one of her better qualities, the ability to receive information cleanly, without her own responses colonizing the space. Lucius Malfoy, she said when he finished. Yes. And the 3rd task. She tapped her quill against her palm. The tournament is run by the Ministry. The tasks are designed by a small group, Bagman, Crouch, several others. If Lucius Malfoy has access to that group, he can affect the task itself, Harry said. Or the circumstances surrounding it. She looked at him. Harry. Someone entered you in the tournament. Someone who intended for you to be in it, in a specific position, at a specific time. Her voice was careful and precise. All of this, the blocks, the bond, the Ministry's reaction, Malfoy's father, it is connected. It has to be connected. Someone's been playing a very long game, Harry said. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. My Grandmere also told me, about bonds, about how they work, that they do not activate on schedule. They activate when the parties are ready. When something within them reaches sufficient, she called it maturity. Maturity. Not of age but of self. She looked at him steadily. The blocks were preventing your maturation. They were keeping you from the point where the bond could activate. Which means someone knew about the bond, Harry said slowly. Or suspected it. Or was afraid of it. She held his gaze. A level 7 wizard with a fully activated ancient mate bond and elder law protections is extremely difficult to control. And someone very much wants to control me. Or, she said, destroy you. And one approach to arranging that is to engineer a situation in which you enter a dangerous tournament without your full capacity, without your legal protections, she stopped. Without you, Harry said. The reading room was very quiet. Without the bond having activated, she said carefully. Same thing, Harry said. She held his gaze for a long moment. Outside, the night had come down fully, the windows' dark mirrors reflecting the candlelight and their own faces back at them. There is someone in this castle, she said, who is not what they appear to be. It wasn't a new idea. Harry had been running on a background sense of threat since September, since his name had come out of the goblet. But hearing it framed this way, in the context of everything else, gave it a sharper shape. I know, he said. We need to be careful. She paused. Both of us. The bond makes us, she searched for the word. Visible. To each other and to anyone who understands what it is. If someone knows enough to have anticipated it and feared it, they know enough to understand that targeting one of us affects the other. Harry thought about Gabrielle. About the second task. About the cold specific feeling of being in water, which he had experienced in the prefect's bathroom working out the egg's clue before the blocks came down and would experience again in February with a very different magical capacity. February, he said. The second task is February 24th, she said. 5 weeks. And whoever is behind all of this, he stopped. The third task is June. Whatever's being planned for the third task, it needs all of us alive until then. That is a deeply uncomfortable source of reassurance, she said. Yeah. He looked at the table, then up at her. Fleur. If the bond means the task takes me as your hostage, then I will retrieve you, she said. Flat. Immediate. And I will be faster than anyone else in the lake. I'm not questioning that, he said. I'm saying, if it's me, and you retrieve me, and then Gabrielle is also a hostage, then you retrieve Gabrielle, she said. Because you, Ave, already promised to. He held her gaze. Right, he said. She looked at her books. Back at him. We should practice, she said. What? You, Ave, been working on wandless magic in the morning. I know, she caught his look. I saw you come in with ink on your wand hand but the wand in your pocket and nothing on your left hand, which means you were doing fine work without the wand. Don't look at me like that. She lifted her chin slightly. I was observing. You were watching me walk into breakfast. I was noting significant details in my environment. It is a different activity. She opened her book to a marked page. I've been working on something specific. A Veela technique, it is not in any standard wizarding curriculum. It is about channeling the allure not as attraction but as a shield. A repulsion field. She paused. If I could control it precisely enough, I could use it to create a barrier in the water. Push attackers or obstacles away without stunning the people on your side, Harry said. Like Gabrielle. Or you. A pause. If you're the hostage. They looked at each other across the small table in the small room, two people in the middle of a very large, very old situation, finding the edges of what they were capable of and discovering those edges were farther out than either of them had previously mapped. Show me the technique, Harry said. She raised an eyebrow. You cannot use Veela magic. No. But I can watch how you think about it, and there might be an analog in what I've been doing wandlessly. He paused. We're stronger together than separately. That's what the bond does, isn't it? It doesn't just connect us. It compounds us. She looked at him for a beat that was slightly longer than it needed to be. "Yes," she said, with the tone of someone having a hypothesis confirmed. "That is exactly what it does." They worked for 2 hours. It was the first time Harry had seen Fleur actually working, not composure, not performance, not the elegant effortlessness of someone who wanted you to think nothing was difficult. This was Fleur the way Cedric had described her, head down, focused, relentless, going back to something that hadn't worked and approaching it from a different angle without any apparent frustration at the repetition, just the patient systematic intelligence of someone who understands that the 10th attempt might be the one and the only way to find out is to attempt it 10 times. The Veela Allure was extraordinary to watch. It was subtle from the outside, not the shimmer wave of attraction, more like a hum in the air, a pressure, the sensation right before lightning without any of the lightning. She got it for about 3 seconds on her 4th attempt, a sustained field that pushed the books on the table slightly sideways and made the candle flames lean away, and she dropped it and looked at her hands with an expression of intense satisfaction that she schooled immediately but not quite fast enough. "You do that," Harry said. "What?" "Hide when something works. Like you're surprised it did." He paused. "Did someone tell you not to expect things to work?" She was very still. "My first magic professor," she said, after a moment. "At primary level. Before Beau's batons." The voice was neutral, factual, the kind of tone that means the information is old enough to have been processed but sharp enough to still need care. "She told my parents that Veela blood in a magical child created unreliable magical patterns. She suggested I might not develop standard wizard abilities to the expected level." A pause. "I was 9. Harry thought about all the things he might say to that, and chose the most direct one. "She was wrong," he said. Fleur looked at him. The composure was all the way down, not the frightened version or the public version. Just her. Just the face without its architecture. "Yes," she said. She was. They worked for another hour, Harry adapting the Veela shield logic into something that worked through his own newly unrestricted magical core, finding the analog in the wandless techniques. It wasn't the same. It wouldn't do the same thing. But there was a shape to the intention that translated, and when he found it, sustained it for 4, 5, 6 full seconds, Fleur said nothing but set her quill down and looked at the small visual distortion in the air near Harry's hand with the expression of a skilled person watching another skilled person do something worth watching. "That is not the same as what I was doing," she said. "No. But it's related." He lowered his hand. "In the water, if we're both down there, we work in tandem," she said. "Yes." Midnight was nearly on them by the time they noticed. The castle had gone fully silent around them, the deep sleeping quiet of an institution that ran on morning schedules. Fleur gathered her books. Harry gathered his notes. They moved toward the door in the companionable efficiency of two people who have done something real together and don't need to annotate it. At the door, she stopped. "Harry," she said. He waited. She had her book bag on her shoulder and she was looking at the middle distance, something working through her expression, and when she looked at him it was with the directness she used when she had decided something. "I want you to know," she said, "that I am not doing any of this because of the bond." She held his gaze. "The researching, the working, this." She gestured slightly, encompassing the room, the 2 hours, all of it. "I am doing it because I want to. Because I choose to." A pause. "I thought it was important to say." Harry held her gaze. "I know," he said. "Good." She nodded once. "Good night." She walked down the corridor, precise footsteps on stone, and she turned the corner toward the Beauxbatons wing and was gone. Harry stood in the empty corridor for a moment. The bond was warm in his chest, steady and quiet, the compass pointing northeast, and underneath the old magic certainty, something newer and more specifically his, something that had nothing to do with Veela blood or ancient law or level 7 classifications, something that was simply, her. He walked back to Gryffindor Tower in the silent castle, moving through the dark with a new sureness. Through the wards he could feel like walls, through the magic of the place that recognized something in him it hadn't had occasion to engage before, and he found the portrait hole and gave the password and climbed through, and the common room fire was almost embers and the room was empty, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, the dark felt like something he was walking through rather than something that was waiting for him. He took the stairs 2 at a time. Chapter 4, Old Blood, Old Laws. The Gringotts letter specified a Thursday. Harry spent the 3 days before it the way he spent most things now, working. The Wandla sessions had expanded from 1 hour to 2, and the results had graduated from sustained light and minor levitation to something more complex and substantially more alarming. On Tuesday morning he had, without quite meaning to, repelled a training charm Hermione sent at him across the width of the unused classroom with enough force that it hit the far wall and left a scorch mark the size of a dinner plate. They had both stared at the mark for a long moment. "We should probably fix that," Hermione said. "Yeah." Harry looked at his hand. "I didn't mean to do that." "I know. That's the part that's interesting." She was already writing something in her notebook, which she'd been keeping since the first morning in a handwriting so small it was functionally a code. The response was proportional to the incoming energy and then some. Like it amplified. "Harry, in the literature on high-order magical cores, there's a concept called resonant return. Where the power coming back is greater than the power going in." "How much greater?" She looked at the scorch mark. "I sent a standard second-year training charm," she said. He looked at the scorch mark too. "Right," he said. The wandless work was one thing. The other thing was the bond, which was developing on its own schedule regardless of anyone's preferences. The compass sense had sharpened over 2 weeks into something more specific, less that direction and more she's in the reading room, she's been there for an hour, she got up 5 minutes ago and sat back down. It wasn't invasive. It didn't transmit thoughts or feelings in any detailed way. But it was present in the background of his awareness the way his own heartbeat was present, something he noticed only when he was paying attention or when it changed. It changed, sometimes. On Wednesday afternoon, in the middle of a defense against the dark arts practical, something spiked, a brief sharp thing, gone in 2 seconds, and Harry's concentration broke completely. He managed the practical anyway, but afterward, in the corridor, he'd sent a note through a second year to the reading room. "Are you all right?" The reply came back in 20 minutes, in Fleur's precise handwriting. "I am fine. I dropped a book on my foot." It was a large book. He had not expected to feel quite as relieved as he did. He had also not expected to laugh, quite as much as he did, alone in the third-floor corridor with a small square of parchment. Ron, walking past at that exact moment, said nothing but looked at Harry's face and then at the parchment and then back at Harry's face with an expression that communicated a complete and detailed understanding of the situation and the restraint of someone choosing not to exercise their extensive vocabulary on it. "Not a word," Harry said. "I'm just walking to Transfiguration," Ron said, with great dignity. Gringotts on Thursday was a production. Dumbledore had arranged it, a supervised visit, official letter from the school, McGonagall accompanying as staff guardian, Hermione and Ron permitted as what the headmaster's letter described as the students' trusted associates. There was a brief argument about whether Fleur could come, which Fleur ended by simply appearing at the school gates in her outdoor robes at the relevant time and saying, when McGonagall looked at her, "I have an interest in this visit." For reasons that do not require explanation. McGonagall looked at her for a moment. Then she said, quite, in her most Scots voice, and they all got on the carriages. Diagon Alley in January was a stripped-down version of itself, most of the holiday decorations down, the crowds thin, the shopfronts presenting the austere efficiency of a place that has done its festive work and returned to business. It was cold enough that breath showed, and the cobblestones were iced in the shadows where the sun didn't reach, and Gringotts at the top of its white steps looked the same as it always did, which was to say like an institution that found the concept of time largely beneath its notice. The goblin who met them was named Sharpclaw, and he had the particular Gringotts manner of someone who has been expecting you and has prepared accordingly but will express neither anticipation nor warmth about this. He led them through the marble hall, past the tellers and the rumble of carts in the deep distance, and instead of turning toward the vault cart platform he led them through a side door Harry had never noticed. The room beyond was small and formal, with a long stone table and 5 chairs and a single gas lamp over the center, and on the table was a locked iron box about the size of a shoebox, and beside it a folder of parchment so thick it was essentially a book. "Mr. Potter," Sharpclaw said, gesturing at the chair directly before the box. "The Potter Family Trust documentation, as requested under Magical Majority Protocol. The instruments in the box will activate on blood contact." He looked at Harry with goblin eyes that were very old and entirely unsentimental. "We have been waiting for this appointment for some time." Harry sat down. The others arranged themselves around the table, McGonagall at his left with the careful posture of someone prepared for anything, Hermione at his right already looking at the parchment folder with controlled hunger, Ron across the table, Fleur beside Ron, watching the iron box with the focused attention she brought to anything she considered significant. "Blood contact," Harry said. Sharpclaw produced a small silver implement. "A drop on the lock. The Potter family instruments are keyed to the direct bloodline." Harry pressed the implement to the tip of his finger and held it over the lock and watched the blood fall. The box opened. It didn't open the way boxes open. It opened the way something wakes up. The iron unfolded from itself with a sound that was less mechanical than organic, layer after layer, wider than its original dimensions should have allowed, and when it was finished what lay in front of Harry was not what he'd expected. There was a ring. Old gold, set with a deep red stone that was not ruby, too dark for ruby, too warm, with a specific interior light that pulsed once when Harry's eyes fell on it and then settled. There was a folded letter in a handwriting he recognized from photographs, and his throat did something that he managed to keep off his face, mostly. There was a second letter in a different handwriting, older, in English that was slightly archaic. There was a small mirror, silver-framed, its face dark. And there was what appeared to be a coin, gold, engraved on both faces with symbols that Harry couldn't quite read but that resonated with a strange familiarity, the same way the words resonated, something in his magic reaching toward them before his mind caught up. "The ring," Sharpclaw said, "is the Potter family signet. Ancient and noble house insignia, carries the recognition charm of the Wisengamot seat. When you wear it, you are legally and formally the head of House Potter." A pause. "It has been waiting since your parents' death." Another pause, shorter, with something in it that Harry couldn't categorize from a goblin face. "Your mother placed certain additional enchantments on the ring. Protective enchantments, non-standard. She was, from what we understand, an exceptional witch." "She was," McGonagall said quietly. It came out with the weight of personal knowledge, and Harry looked at her briefly, and she met his eyes with something fierce and contained. "The letters are for you specifically," Sharpclaw said. "Private communication, sealed. We have not read them." He said this with the tone of someone communicating a professional code rather than an individual virtue. "The mirror is a family communication instrument. It connects to a matching mirror in the Potter family vault and to any other mirrors keyed to the line, though as you are the sole living Potter the function is currently limited." He paused. "The coin is," he stopped. Looked at the coin differently, more carefully. "The coin is something we did not have full records on. It appears to be of preministry origin. Significantly preministry." He looked at Harry. "We would appreciate knowing more about it, when you've had an opportunity to examine it." Harry picked up the ring. The moment it touched his skin it did something, not the shattering of the blocks, nothing so dramatic, more like a quiet settling, a sense of recognition between himself and the object, the ring acknowledging him and him acknowledging the ring in something very old and both of them agreeing that this was correct. He put it on his right hand, the traditional hand for house rings, and it fit as though it had been sized for him. The red stone pulsed once. Then went still. From across the table, Fleur made a small sound, involuntary, quickly controlled. "What?" Harry said. Nothing. She was looking at the ring with the expression she used when something had surprised her past her defenses. The enchantment. Your mother's enchantment. I can feel the edge of it from here. She paused. It is very strong. Old love magic, the kind that, she stopped, and looked away from the ring and at the table. It is simply powerful, she said. Remarkably so. Harry looked at the ring. At the letters. He picked up the letter in his mother's handwriting. I'll read these later, he said. His voice was perfectly steady. In private. Nobody argued with this. Hermione had moved the parchment folder in front of herself and Ron was leaning over and she was translating the more archaic sections in whispers. McGonagall was looking at her hands. Fleur was quiet. Sharpclaw opened the folder of documentation and began. They were in the Gringotts side room for 2 hours. The summary of what Harry learned in those 2 hours, filtered through Hermione's running translation of the more complex legal sections and Sharpclaw's patient, precise explanations, was this: the Potter family had been an ancient and noble house for approximately 900 years. The Wisingamot seat was hereditary and had been vacant since James Potter's death in 1981. Harry's claim to it was uncontested and, with the ring on his finger, active. He had assets in the family vault, old assets, accumulated over centuries, that Sharpclaw described with goblin frankness as substantial. He had a family estate in the west of England that had been under a Fidelius charm since 1981, sealed by the family solicitor, the charm currently serving as an impenetrable preservation of the property, waiting. None of that was the significant thing. The significant thing was the document at the back of the folder, which Hermione went silent over for a full minute before she looked up. Harry, she said. What is it? She set the document on the table and turned it to face him. The handwriting was the older one from the second letter in the box, archaic, careful, utterly legible once you adjust it to the spelling conventions. It's a family charter document, she said. She checked the date. 1143. She looked at him steadily. It's a covenant. Between the Potter family and she stopped. Looked at the document again. Harry. The Potter family has a covenant with the Veela clans. Has had one since the 12th century. The room was very quiet. A covenant, Fleur said, from across the table. Her voice was very controlled. Specifying what? Hermione found the relevant section. It says, let it be recorded that the House of Potter, having rendered service of great and lasting consequence to the Veela of the High Mountain clans in the year of our Lord 1138, accepts in return a covenant of mutual recognition and aid, to be carried in the blood of both lines in perpetuity, such that in any generation where the bond of magical resonance presents itself between a Potter heir and a Veela-blooded individual, said bond shall be recognized under the highest elder laws as both valid and sacred. She looked up. It goes on in more legal language, but that's the core of it. Harry looked at the document. Someone new, he said. Not about us specifically. But about the possibility of us. For 900 years, whoever set those blocks would have known, he stopped. Dumbledore is thorough. He would have read the family records. He knew there was a possibility of a bond, Hermione said. Flat. And he blocked you anyway. McGonagall's hands had gone very still on the table. He blocked me before I could be recognized, Harry said. The bond couldn't activate if my magic was at 1/10 of its capacity. I was functionally invisible to whatever mechanism identifies Potters and, he looked at Fleur. And Veela-blooded individuals who are compatible. Fleur was looking at the covenant document with an expression Harry was starting to understand meant she was doing several things at once, processing, cataloging, deciding what to do with the information. Then she looked up at him. My grandmere, she said, knew our family had a covenant. She told my mother. She didn't know which family, the records on the Veela side were lost in the 17th century. She just knew there was an old covenant with a noble wizarding house. She paused. She used to say to me, she used to say when you find him, you will know him not by what he looks like but by what his magic sounds like. I thought it was, she stopped. I thought it was the kind of thing old people say to young people to make them believe in something. What does my magic sound like? Harry said. She looked at him. Like something that has been waiting a very long time, she said quietly. They emerged from Gringotts into the cold of Diagon Alley at 2:30, and the light was already going in the low January sky, the alley's windows beginning to show lampglow, and Harry had the ring on his finger and the 2 letters folded in his inside pocket and the weight of 900 years of family history sitting alongside everything else he was carrying, and he stood on the white steps and breathed the cold air for a moment. Ron appeared beside him. All right? Processing, Harry said. The Covenant thing, Ron said. I mean, blimey. That's a lot. Does it change anything? For you? Harry thought about it. The Covenant was old and it was real and it added a layer of context, but it didn't change what he felt when he sat across the table from Fleur in the reading room at midnight, or the way she'd looked when she talked about her father seeing her grandmother without the allure, or the 2 hours they'd spent working on magic and finding where their approaches met. The Covenant explained the bond. It didn't create what was happening underneath and alongside the bond, in the territory that wasn't fate or old law but was simply them. No, he said. Not really. Ron nodded slowly. Good, he said. That's good. Fleur came down the steps with Hermione, and the 2 of them had apparently been engaged in a detailed conversation during the last 5 minutes because Hermione had her notebook out and was writing while walking, which was a skill she developed over years of necessity. Fleur was talking in the quick, precise way she talked when she was genuinely engaged rather than being careful. The Wisengamot seat is the critical piece, Hermione was saying. Because it's not just symbolic. Voting rights. Legislative access. Harry could table motions regarding the elder laws before the ministry has time to build their legal arguments against them. The session calendar, Fleur said, runs February through June. If E takes the seat in February, before Undersecretary Vance's people have found their precedents, yes. Hermione looked at Harry as they reached the bottom of the steps. You need to claim the seat formally. Soon. I know you have the tournament, and the task, and everything else, but, tell me what I need to do, Harry said. Hermione had, of course, already started a list. Back at the castle, Harry went to his dormitory and read the letters. His mother's first. Lily Potter had written it in the summer of 1981, which meant she'd written it roughly 4 months before she died, and the knowledge of that sat with him while he read, a steady ache. It was 3 pages, front and back. She'd known the blocks were there, had agreed to them, for reasons she laid out in the letter with the careful honesty of a woman who knew she might be wrong and was documenting her reasoning for the version of events she hoped would never happen. We are frightened, Harry. Your father and I and Dumbledore and everyone who knows what's coming. We are frightened in ways that don't lend themselves to sleep. And you are the most extraordinary magical being any of us has ever encountered, and you are 13 months old, and Dumbledore says that if you know who feels what you are, if any of his people feel it, they will come for you before you can possibly protect yourself. The blocks are meant to buy you time. To let you grow up as a child, not as a symbol or a weapon or a target. But, Harry, if you are reading this, then the blocks came down. And if the blocks came down, it means you found who you were always going to find. And I want you to know, your magic chose long before you could. Our family made a covenant before either of us was born. And whatever anyone tells you about control, or safety, or what you should and shouldn't be, you are my son and you are whole and you are the most astonishing thing I have ever seen, and I love you, and I'm so sorry we weren't there. Harry sat on his bed for a long time after he finished it. Then he read his grandfather's letter, which was older and more formal and detailed the covenant's history and the family's understanding of what it meant, and it was important and he absorbed it, but it was the 3 pages in his mother's handwriting that stayed with him. He folded them carefully. Put them in the pocket over his heart, where the ring's weight rested against his sternum. The thing with the ministry happened on a Friday. Harry had been expecting something. Malfoy's warning about legal noise was still sitting in the back of his mind, and Vance's visit had been too controlled to be the last word. What he hadn't expected was the specific form it took. He was in McGonagall's office for a transfiguration consultation when the Fleur flared and a head appeared that he didn't recognize, middle-aged, officious, the expression of someone delivering prepared remarks. Undersecretary Vance regrets she cannot be present personally, the head said. She has asked me to communicate the following to Mr. Potter and Professor McGonagall. It produced a folded document from somewhere off-screen. The Ministry of Magic, exercising its duty of care over underage witches and wizards, has filed under Education Act Clause 7 an application for temporary magical oversight of Harry James Potter, pending a formal review of his current magical status. In practical terms, it means they want to put the blocks back on, Harry said. The head looked at him with the specific discomfort of a messenger receiving the response ahead of the prepared speech. The application is for a supervised transition framework that would, I'm the head of House Potter, Harry said. The ring is on my finger. Which means I am not under ministry guardianship. I am my own legal guardian under the ancient and noble house provisions. He looked at the head. Your Education Act does not apply to heads of ancient and noble houses. That has been true since the 14th century. He paused. Hermione, specifically, would like you to refer to Wisengamot Charter Section 12, Paragraph 4, which Hermione had me memorize on Wednesday. McGonagall was looking at him with an expression that she was doing absolutely nothing to school. The head in the Fleur was silent for a moment. The ministry's position is that the ancient and noble house provisions were suspended by the Education Acts of 1875, Harry said. I know. Hermione also had me memorize the counterargument to that, which is that suspension of constitutional provisions requires a 3/4 majority of the full Wisengamot and the 1875 vote was 41%, which means the suspension was never legally valid. He held the head's gaze. Tell Undersecretary Vance that I'll see her at the first Wisengamot session of February, when I formally claim the Potter seat, and we can discuss this in front of the full body. The Fleur went out. McGonagall was completely silent for 4 seconds. Miss Granger has been busy, she said. She really has, Harry agreed. McGonagall looked at him steadily. In her expression was something he'd never had directed at him so clearly before, the full weight of her particular kind of regard, the kind she reserved for things she considered genuinely excellent. Your mother, she said, would have enjoyed this quite enormously. Harry looked at her. She was a great deal like you, McGonagall said. In the ways that matter. She paused. In the ways that made her genuinely formidable when she decided something was wrong. Harry held this carefully, the way you hold something that might break if handled carelessly. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me. Go tell Miss Granger she's right about the 1875 Act, she'll be insufferably pleased about it for a week and the rest of us will have to live with it. But the corner of her mouth was doing something that, on anyone else's face, would simply be called a smile. Fleur found out about the ministry filing from Madame Maxime, who had contacts in the French ministry and had been alerted via diplomatic channels, and she appeared in the reading room that evening radiating the specific quality of anger that was very cold and very focused and entirely unlike a storm, more like a precision instrument. They filed it on a Friday, she said, before Harry could say anything. So that the earliest possible response is Monday, which gives them the weekend to, I already responded, Harry said. She stopped. Looked at him. Through the Fleur, he said. In McGonagall's office. I told them Hermione's arguments about the 1875 Act and invited them to have the conversation in front of the Wisengamot in February. She looked at him for a long moment. You had this prepared. Hermione had this prepared. I memorized it. You knew they would file something this week. Malfoy said they were building legal arguments. It was logical to build counter-arguments before they used theirs. He paused. Also I may have sent a letter to Madame Bone's office on Monday. Fleur stared at him. You contacted Madame Bones. Her assistant confirmed receipt Thursday. He paused. She apparently sent back a note saying she was aware of the situation and watching with interest. Which I'm choosing to take as supportive. Fleur sat down. She sat the way she did when something had reconfigured her expectations, precise, deliberate, taking stock. You have been very busy, she said. So have you, he said. The Beauxbatons board has sent 2 more letters. 3, she said. I've answered them all. She folded her hands on the table. Madame Maxime has now officially communicated to the board that my participation in the tournament is fully supported by the school administration and that any further attempts to pressure me regarding the bond will be treated as interference in an elder law matter. A pause. She was very elegant about it. 3 sentences. 3 sentences is elegant, Harry agreed. They looked at each other across the table, 2 people who had spent a week in separate simultaneous campaigns, discovering that they had been, without coordinating, entirely consistent in their approach. We make good allies, Fleur said. It was not just allies, and they both knew it, and neither of them said so, but the air in the reading room had the quality of a thing that had been acknowledged without being named, which was its own kind of naming. Yeah, Harry said. We do. She opened her book. He opened his notes. They worked in the particular comfortable silence of 2 people who have gotten past the point of needing to perform their ease with each other. After about 20 minutes, Fleur said, without looking up, the Potter family covenant. What do you think it means for your family history? Harry considered the question. He'd been sitting with it all week, in the margins of everything else. I think my family had more history than anyone let me know about, he said. My whole life people have told me about my parents. The war, Voldemort, the sacrifice. And that's real and it matters. But they were also people in a family with 900 years of history, and, he stopped. No one thought to tell me that part. Because it didn't serve the narrative, Fleur said. What narrative? The orphan hero. The chosen one with no power base, no context, no resources. That version of you is easier to control than, she gestured at him, at the ring, at the general concept of what he was becoming. This version. Harry turned his pen in his fingers. Dumbledore's not trying to control me like Voldemort is. His version is, more sophisticated, she said. More genuinely caring, in its way. Which makes it harder to resist. She looked at him. You don't have to choose between understanding his intentions and requiring better of him. Harry held that. No, he said. I don't. On the Sunday before the second task, Gabrielle arrived. She came with 2 other Beauxbatons students for what was officially a weekend visit to see the lake and the grounds before the task, but practically she went immediately to Fleur and stayed at her elbow for the first 2 hours. Harry was introduced to her in the entrance hall, and she looked at him with the same silver-gray eyes as her sister but an entirely different face, rounder, more mobile, unguarded in the way only an 8-year-old can be, and she looked at him for approximately 4 seconds and then said, in clear, confident English, "You are the one for Fleur." Gabrielle, Fleur said. It is true, Gabrielle said, untroubled. It is also not a polite opening statement. Grandmere says truth is more important than, Grandmere is not here, Fleur said, with the specific older sibling tone that transcended language. Harry crouched down to Gabrielle's eye level. She looked at him with frank curiosity, no shyness in it. I'm Harry, he said. I know about your grandmother's road. Gabrielle's eyes went wide. Fleur told you about the road? She told me what your grandmother said about it. Gabrielle looked at her sister with an expression of absolute delight. Fleur had gone the kind of still that suggested she was choosing not to have visible feelings about this. She never tells anyone, Gabrielle said to Harry, conspiratorially. I know, Harry said. Will you show me the lake? Gabrielle said. Fleur says it has a giant squid. I want to see the giant squid. Harry glanced at Fleur, who gave him the look of someone who knows their younger sibling is deploying charm deliberately and is choosing not to intervene. "Yeah," Harry said. "All right." They walked to the lake, all three of them, in the cold grey Sunday. Gabrielle asked approximately 40 questions, mostly to Harry, ranging from the giant squid's name, Harold, apparently, though no one had official confirmation, to whether Hogwarts food was really better than Beauxbaton's food. Harry said he didn't know because he'd only had one, and Gabrielle said this was a diplomatic answer, and Fleur said it was a correct one, to whether Harry was frightened about the task tomorrow. "Yes," Harry said honestly. Gabrielle looked at him. "But you will do it anyway." "Yeah." "Fleur is like that too," she said, with the easy certainty of someone reporting observed fact. "She is frightened of many things. But she does them anyway." She looked at her sister. "It is why she is very good." Fleur was looking at the lake. But her hand, at her side, had opened slightly, the fingers loose, and Harry was close enough to see the micro-movement, the thing she did when something moved her past the capacity to maintain perfect composure. Later, when Gabrielle had been deposited back with the Beauxbatons delegation for dinner, Fleur and Harry stood at the edge of the lake alone in the early dark. "She likes you," Fleur said. "She's remarkable," Harry said. "She is 8. But the tone was warm. "She has no defenses yet. Everything is visible." A pause. "I was like that once." "What happened?" "Beauxbatons," she said dryly. "And the allure becoming visible. And being looked at." She paused. "One build structure. It is not," she searched for the word. "It is not coldness. It is architecture," Harry said. She looked at him. "Yes. A beat. I used that word to you before. In the corridor after the ball. You said the architecture of your composure." He paused. "I remember most of what you say." She looked at the lake for a moment. The ice had broken at the center this week, the surface open and dark. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," he agreed. "Whatever appends with the hostages, I have it," he said. "I promise." She was quiet. He could feel the bond, both of them could, the warmth of it, the resonance, the ancient structure doing exactly what it was built to do, which was to tell two people in unambiguous terms, "This is real, this matters, hold on to it." "Harry," she said. "Yeah." She turned to face him, and she was very close, and the failing light made everything simpler, fewer edges, just the lake and the dark and the cold and her face. "After tomorrow," she said. "When we've both done what we need to do and come out the other side." She paused. "I would like to have dinner with you. Not in the castle. Not in the reading room. Somewhere," she stopped. "Somewhere that is not about any of this. The bond, the tournament, the ministry. Just us," Harry said. "Just us," she agreed. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and this was not the bond speaking, or the covenant, or 900 years of Potter family history. This was two 14-year-olds on a frozen lakeshore at the end of a very long day, and the simplicity of it was the most extraordinary thing. "Yeah," he said. "I'd like that." She turned back toward the castle. He fell into step beside her. Their shoulders were close enough to almost touch. Neither of them moved away. The castle above them was lit in every tower, warm and enormous against the winter dark, and it looked, Harry thought, the way home is supposed to look when you come to it from outside, like something that was waiting, like something that has always had room for you, like something that knows your name. The ring was warm on his finger. He walked in. Chapter 5, The Lake and the Fire. February 24th arrived the way important days always did, preceded by a night that was too short and a morning that moved too fast. Harry was awake before his alarm. The dormitory was dark at 6, the winter sky outside the window the particular blue-black of an hour that hadn't decided whether to be night or morning yet, and he lay in his bed doing an inventory of himself the way he'd started doing every morning since January, working through the layers of his magic the way you check the state of something living, making sure everything was present and functional and ready. It was more than ready. His magic had been building towards something all week, a specific tension in his core that he recognized as anticipatory, old magic responding to the proximity of old magic, the bond resonating with the task's enchantments, everything in him saying pay attention, something real is today. He got up, dressed, went through his morning wandless work in 15 minutes in the dark common room, then sat by the fire and read through Hermione's task notes for the 4th time. He'd solved the egg clue in December, before the blocks came down, actually, which meant he'd solved it at 60% capacity, which said something about the egg's difficulty calibration. Breathe underwater for an hour. Get his hostage back from the mere people at the bottom of the lake. He had his strategy prepared, had been refining it for 2 months, and the strategy was significantly different now than it would have been without the unblocking. He didn't need gillyweed. He'd figured that out in early January, working in the 3rd floor classroom, when he'd accidentally sustained a wandless bubblehead charm for 11 minutes while distracted by something Hermione was saying and only noticed when he started wondering why the air tasted different. The fully unblocked version of his magic could sustain enchantments indefinitely that the blocked version could barely initiate, and water breathing was not at the outer edge of what he was capable of. Not even close. The question was the hostage. He'd been running on 2 possible scenarios since Fleur had raised it on the battlements, either Gabrielle, taken as Fleur's most precious person, or himself, claimed by the task's old magic as the bond's natural designation. He'd prepared for both. He'd also prepared for a 3rd option, that Gabrielle was his hostage, because the task predated the bond activation and the magic might not have updated, but that felt wrong in ways he couldn't entirely articulate, like expecting an ancient enchantment to fail to notice an ancient bond, and ancient magic had, in his recent experience, a very good sense of itself. Ron came downstairs at 7, hair catastrophic, carrying a piece of toast. "You've been up for hours," he said. "Since 6. "Course you have." He dropped into the other chair and looked at the fire. "How's the—" he tapped his sternum. "Present," Harry said. "Both of us awake." He paused. "She's been up since 5:30. Ron's expression did the thing it still occasionally did when Harry said things like she's been up since 5:30 without having seen or spoken to Fleur, a brief adjustment, a recalibration of what normal meant. He was getting better at it. The adjustment was faster every time. "You're ready," Ron said. "Not a question." "Yeah," Harry said. "You know what you're doing if she's the one who, I know." Ron nodded. Ate his toast. "Hermione's going to be watching from the platform with a monitoring charm she invented herself because she doesn't trust the standard ones. She's got the task regulations memorized and she is prepared to dispute any scoring decisions that she considers inaccurate," Harry said. "I was going to say criminally wrong but sure." A pause. "Fred and George put money on you finishing first. I told them I thought you and Fleur might be close. They said," he stopped. "What?" "They said if you two finish simultaneously, the judges are going to have a genuinely philosophical problem on their hands because technically a bonded pair might register as a single entity for task completion purposes under old competition law." Ron looked at him. "I have no idea if they made that up." 50-50, Harry said. "Yeah, that was my read too." The lake was massive and grey and absolutely serious. Harry stood at the edge with the other champions at 10 o'clock and looked at it and felt the scale of it, not as intimidation, which was how he'd experienced large dangerous things before, but as something more like respect. The lake had been here for 1,000 years. The mere people had been here for longer. Whatever was down in the dark at the bottom had its own laws and its own time, and it didn't particularly care about Triwizard Tournament scoring rubrics. Bagman was talking. The specifics of the task. 1 hour. Hostages at the bottom. The usual. Harry looked sideways at Fleur. She was in her tournament uniform, pale blue, bows batons, and her hair was braided back, her face composed with the specific precision of the version of composure she used for things that mattered. She looked cold and clean and entirely ready. She looked sideways at him at the same moment he looked at her. Something passed between them, not the bond exactly, not the external thing, but the specific warmth underneath it, the human part, the part that was them being two people who had talked at midnight and worked magic in small rooms and stood at the edge of a frozen lake in January. He nodded once. She nodded back. Cedric, on Harry's other side, said very quietly, "Good luck." "You too," Harry said. Victor Crumb, at the far end of the line, was staring at the water with the focused blankness of someone who had long ago decided that concentration was more useful than emotion. Harry had a certain respect for it. Bagman's whistle. Harry walked into the lake. He didn't dive. That was the first thing. Everyone expected diving, expected the lunge of someone trying to get it done quickly, and Crumb was already in the water before the echo of the whistle had cleared, using a partial transfiguration that gave him something between a man and a shark. Cedric had gone with a bubblehead charm, elegant and quick. Harry stood at the waterline and let his magic settle into the task. The bubblehead charm came on without a wand, without a word, a matter of intention and breath, and then he walked in and went under and the world became the lake's world, cold and dark and green, shafts of winter light coming from somewhere above cutting through the murk at angles that turned the underwater vegetation into a forest of dim silver columns, and around and below everything the pressure of depth and the distant, unreadable current of very old enchantment. He could move faster underwater than he should have been able to. That was the first thing he discovered. The bubblehead charm was doing more than preserving air, it was, apparently, extending the same physical efficiency to his entire body, the kind of thing that the textbooks described as a side effect of high-level sustained charm work and which Harry experienced practically as being able to swim like something that was built for it. The Mere People's settlement was somewhere below and ahead. He'd studied the lake's topography from above, from the astronomy tower with a borrowed spyglass, and had a reasonable mental map. He went deep and angled toward the center. The lake was alive in ways the surface didn't suggest. Schools of things with very large eyes scattered as he moved through them. Something circled below him at a distance that was respectful but attentive. The Grindylows were there, he felt their presence before he saw them, a kind of watchfulness in the water, and he moved through it without engaging. They were not his priority and he suspected that whatever old magic the bond was running on had communicated this to them in some way he couldn't entirely account for, because they watched but didn't approach. 15 minutes down, he found the Mare settlement. It was built into a rock shelf, structures of stone and coral, a kind of village, larger than he'd imagined, lit by the natural bioluminescence of plants cultivated specifically for it. The Mare people were there, watching his approach with the expressionless attention of people who had seen humans do this before and found it interesting in the way unusual weather is interesting. The hostages were tied to a stone column at the settlement center. Harry counted them as he approached. Ron. Hermione. Cho. Gabrielle. He stopped. 4 hostages. 4 champions. Which meant, he looked at the column more carefully. Each champion's hostage was presumably designated. Hermione's face was the calm, sleeping calm of the enchantment, not the natural calm she had when she was actually asleep. Harry knew the difference. Ron beside her, same quality of stillness. Cho for Cedric. Gabrielle for Fleur. And no one for him. He hung in the water and looked at the 4 sleeping figures tied to the stone column and understood what had happened. The task magic had assessed his most precious person and found, correctly, that it was Fleur, and had looked at Fleur's most precious person and found Gabrielle, and the 2 designations had collided in the old magic's logic and produced a solution that was, from an ancient enchantment's perspective, entirely sensible. Fleur's hostage was Gabrielle, and Harry's hostage was Fleur. Meaning Fleur was somewhere above him, working toward him, and he was the one who needed to go up. He started up. Halfway back to the surface he became aware of her, not just the bond's compass, which had been pointing consistently since he'd entered the water, but a specific approaching quality, the sense of something moving fast and with intention in the direction that was him. They nearly collided. She came from above and to the left, moving through the water with a kind of grace that had nothing to do with any standard wizarding technique. It was Veela, he realized, something in her blood that water responded to differently than it responded to wizards, something that made her movement through it less like swimming and more like belonging to it. She pulled up short when she saw him and they hung in the water 3 feet from each other, and there was a brief, absurd, entirely underwater moment of just, looking. He pointed up. She pointed down. Understanding that they had both come from the wrong direction. He pulled out the notes case he'd brought, waterproof parchment, had taken 3 attempts to get right, and wrote with the charmed pen, "I'm the hostage. Task magic, bond logic." She took the pen. Wrote, "I know. I realized when I reached the column. You were not there." He took the pen. "Gabrielle is down there. All 4 hostages. I promised." She looked at him. Something moved through her face, the composure was gone, genuinely gone, and what was underneath it was the same thing he'd seen in her father's way of looking, the same thing she'd described at the Ollery, the thing she'd said she'd always wanted. She looked at him with the allure ambient but not dominant, with the silver-gray eyes, with no architecture at all. "I know you promised," she wrote. "Go. I will get Gabrielle. We go up together." He nodded. They went down together. The Grindylows made their move at the bottom of the lake, near the settlement column, which Harry privately thought was extremely poor tactical timing on their part. There were 6 of them, and they came fast from the left, and Harry turned and extended his hand without thinking, and the wandless repulsion field he'd been developing in the 3rd-floor classroom for 6 weeks came out as a sustained pulse that hit the Grindylows with enough force to send them spinning backward through the water like coins flicked across a table. They didn't come back. Harry turned. Fleur was at the column, untying Gabrielle with quick precise movements, the pale gold braid streaming behind her in the current. He came alongside her, and between them they had all the knots undone in 40 seconds, and Fleur had Gabrielle in her arms, and Harry felt the task magic shift, old enchantment registering completion, the specific clarity of a designed mechanism doing what it was designed to do. He also felt the bond do something it hadn't done before. Not louder, exactly. Not more present. But deeper, a resonance, a reaching, both directions at once. Standing underwater in a mere people's settlement with his magic extended and her magic active and Gabrielle safely in her arms, the bond ran through him like a chord struck on an instrument, clear and full and absolutely certain. He didn't say anything because he couldn't, underwater. But she looked at him over Gabrielle's silver gold hair, and from the look on her face she'd felt it too. They went up. Breaking the surface was like re-entering a different reality, noise, cold air, the shock of above-water sound after the muffled deep, Bagman's amplified voice describing events to the platform crowd, the cheer that went up when Harry surfaced with Fleur right beside him. Gabrielle woke up the moment she left the water and produced an immediate noise of indignant disorientation that suggested she'd been having an extremely good dream and objected to the interruption. She saw Fleur, then she saw Harry, and she threw her free arm around Harry's neck with a ferocity that nearly pulled him back under. "I knew it would be you," she said into his shoulder. "You were asleep," Harry said, managing to get them all to the bank. "I knew anyway," Gabrielle said, with the sublime confidence of the very young and very right. The scoring took a while, and Harry didn't listen to much of it. He helped Gabrielle get her feet on solid ground and turned to find a towel being extended by a Beauxbatons student and took it gratefully, and then he looked at the platform where Hermione was standing with the expression of someone who had maintained composed concern for 47 minutes and was now releasing it in one controlled exhalation. Ron was beside her and he was grinning, the real one, uncomplicated, simply happy, the best version of Ron that Harry had known since they were 11. Cedric was already out of the water, Cho safely retrieved, and he was watching Harry and Fleur with an expression of warm, quiet recognition. The judges conferred. Harry sat on the bank and felt the cold and the particular relief of task completion, not triumph, not yet, but the bone-deep satisfaction of having done what he'd prepared to do. Beside him, Fleur was wrapping Gabrielle in an overlarge coat and speaking to her in rapid French with the specific fierce tenderness he'd watched from the beginning and was now close enough to hear in detail. Gabrielle was saying, in the middle of her sister's careful examination for any task-related harm, "Did you see Harry send the Grindylows?" Fleur. She made an explosive gesture with both hands. "I saw," Fleur said, still checking Gabrielle's hands for marks from the bindings. "It was excellent." "Yes. Do you think he would teach me, Gabrielle?" "I am just asking." Harry looked at them and felt the bond warm and steady in his chest, and underneath the bond something specifically his, something that had nothing to do with ancient covenants and everything to do with the specific people in front of him, a small fierce girl asking questions about wandless magic and her older sister who kept her architecture up against everything except this. The scores came in. First, Harry Potter. Second, Fleur Delacour. Third, Cedric Diggory. Fourth, Victor Crumb, who had rescued his hostage effectively but arrived considerably later, the partial transfiguration having encountered complications in the lower depth. The scoring was close enough between Harry and Fleur that 3 of the 5 judges gave them identical marks, and Bagman announced it with the barely contained delight of a man who had hoped something like this would happen. What Bagman had not anticipated was what came next. Percy Weasley appeared on the platform the moment the scores went up. Harry had known Percy was here, he'd seen him earlier in an official ministry capacity, clipboard and all, the overpressed dress robes and the expression of someone who has attached his self-worth to an institution that may not deserve it. He'd avoided catching Percy's eye. Ron had been avoiding catching Percy's eye since September. But the person beside Percy on the platform was not someone Harry recognized, and that person was walking toward Harry with the focused purposefulness of someone who has been waiting for the task to end and has a prepared agenda. "Mr. Potter," said the man, who introduced himself with the smooth ease of someone accustomed to making introductions feel like favors. "My name is Bartemius Crouch Sr. I apologize for my absence from the earlier stages of the tournament. Illness has kept me from my duties, but I felt well enough to attend today, and I am very glad I did." His eyes were on Harry with a kind of sharp attention that sat wrong. "The task result is extraordinary. I wondered if I might have a brief word." Harry looked at him. Bartemius Crouch Sr. looked, in person, exactly like someone who had been ill recently and was not entirely recovered, the skin too tight, the eyes too bright, the overall quality of a man running on something other than regular health. His posture was impeccable. His robes were immaculate. And something about him made the ring on Harry's finger go warm in a specific, attentive way that Harry had started to associate with old magic identifying something it considered relevant. "Mr. Crouch," Harry said. "Of course." He was aware, in his peripheral vision, of Fleur turning from Gabrielle. Of Madame Maxime appearing near the group. Of Hermione and Ron moving from the platform toward the bank. Of Cedric, a little further off, watching. "I wanted to express the ministry's admiration," Crouch said, "for the extraordinary magical capacity you displayed today. The wandless work particularly. I understand," he paused. "I understand that certain recent changes in your situation have produced a rather remarkable expansion of your abilities." "The blocks coming off, you mean," Harry said. "Precisely." Crouch's eyes were very bright. "And the bond, of course. Remarkable thing. Ancient magic. I've been reviewing the relevant statutes." His voice was measured, conversational, entirely too careful. "There's a great deal of history, associated with this kind of bond. Old magic, old laws." A pause. "Old dangers, too, of course." "What kind of dangers?" Harry said. "A level 7 wizard in an active bond state creates a very specific magical signature," Crouch said. "One that is, how shall I say this, detectable. To those who know how to look." He held Harry's gaze. "I simply want to ensure that you understand the full implications of your situation. The visibility of it." Harry looked at him. At the two bright eyes. At the impeccable posture that didn't quite move right, like clothes hanging on the wrong shape. "Mr. Crouch," Harry said, "are you well?" Crouch's expression flickered. Something moved through it, confusion, then reassertion, then something that was almost a crack, a brief terrible vacancy, and then the measured professional mask came back. "Quite well," he said. "Thank you for asking." He paused. "I must return to my duties. I simply wanted to, Mr. Crouch." Harry kept his voice level. "Is there something you want to tell me?" Another flicker. Longer this time. The eyes lost focus for 2 full seconds, looking somewhere Harry couldn't see, at something Harry couldn't identify, and then snapped back. "Enjoy the rest of your tournament," Crouch said, and turned, and walked away toward the castle at a pace that was just slightly too regulated to be natural. Harry watched him go. Fleur was at his shoulder. "You felt that," she said quietly. "Something's wrong with him," Harry said. "Not wrong." She watched Crouch's retreating back. "Occupied. A beat. There is something sitting in that man that is not entirely him. I can feel it at the edges. It has a quality." She stopped. "Like the blocks had a quality. Something placed from outside." "Imperious?" Harry said. "Or something older," she said. Harry looked at Percy, who was standing nearby with his clipboard and his expression of bureaucratic anxiety, and thought about whether to say anything to him. He decided against it. Percy would need to come to things in his own time, and pushing would make him defensive. But the ring on Harry's finger was still warm and attentive, and the cold structural anger in his chest had reconfigured, pointing now not at a concept but at a specific shape. Someone was using Bartemius Crouch Sr. And whoever was using him had access to the tournament's design, to the task structures, to the machinery of the event meant to kill Harry. He looked at Cedric, who was 50 feet away and whose eyes, when they met Harry's, were serious. He made a small gesture with his head. "Later." Cedric nodded. The explosion happened at dinner. Not a literal one, though it had that quality, the detonation of something that had been pressurized for weeks, suddenly finding a release point. It started with the Daily Prophet that appeared with the Evening Post, carried by an owl that managed to deposit it directly in front of Harry with the accuracy of a trained missile. The headline was not subtle: Potter and Delacour, Ancient Bonds Implications for Tournament Integrity, Ministry calls for review. Underneath, should a bonded pair be permitted to compete in the same tournament? Sources within the Ministry suggest the second task's results may be contested on grounds of magical cooperation enabled by the bond's resonance properties. The Gryffindor table went through a specific sequence of reactions: reading, understanding, outrage. Not just about Harry, the Gryffindors had a fine-tuned sense of unfairness that activated quickly and loudly. Dean was the first to say something, Seamus backing him immediately, and within 4 minutes there was a general table-level consensus that the Prophet was wrong, the Ministry was wrong, and whoever had leaked this was specifically wrong. Harry read the article twice, carefully. Then he set the paper down. "They're trying to disqualify you," Hermione said, from across the table, in the tone she used when she had already completed the analysis and was presenting the conclusion. "They're trying to create grounds to disqualify me," Harry said. "They haven't filed anything yet. This is the narrative groundwork." "Same thing," she said. "Just slower." "What's the argument?" "That the bond creates an unfair advantage. That bonded individuals share magical resources and awareness in a way that amounts to collaboration." She paused. "Which is wrong. The bond does create heightened awareness of each other's location, but it doesn't transmit magical capability between parties, and any shared magic effect requires both parties to deliberately activate it, which didn't happen in the task. You worked independently." Another pause. "Mostly. We went down together and came up together," Harry said. "That was circumstance, not collaboration. The Ministry won't see it that way." "No," she said. "They won't." Across the hall, at the Beauxbatons table, Harry could see Fleur with the paper in her hands. She was reading with the flat expression she used when she was angry and had decided not to display it. Madame Maxime was beside her, reading over her shoulder, and her expression was considerably less controlled. Fleur looked up and found Harry across the hall. He turned his palm up briefly on the table, a small gesture, open. I know. I see it. Something in her face settled. Ron's crisis arrived at 8 o'clock in the common room. It came sideways, the way Ron's important things often did, not as a direct confrontation but as an accumulation, things building behind a surface that had been maintained by effort until the effort ran out. Harry was at the table, notes spread in front of him, writing out the argument about Crouch in case he needed it later, when Ron sat down heavily across from him and said nothing for 2 full minutes. Harry waited. The article, Ron said finally. Yeah. They're going to keep doing it. He looked at his hands. Every time something happens, every time you do something that's you now, the full version, they're going to find a way to make it wrong. An advantage, or a threat, or a scandal. He paused. I didn't know what it was going to be like. Being your friend in this version of everything. Harry looked at him. Are you telling me it's too much? No. Immediate. Firm. No. I'm saying, he stopped. Started differently. I think I had this idea of you that was a specific size. And it was already bigger than most people, being Harry Potter, and I thought I'd made my peace with that, but this is a different scale entirely and he exhaled. I'm figuring it out. Still. I wanted you to know I'm figuring it out, not that I've decided anything. Harry held his gaze. Ron. Yeah. You're my first friend. Not my oldest, I didn't have any before you. My first. The person who, he thought about the chess piece, the first day, the way Ron had just talked to him on the train like he was a person and not a symbol. Whatever this is now, whatever scale, you're still the first person who just talked to me. Ron looked at the table. And, Harry said, I need you to understand that I'm still figuring it out too. Every day. The blocks, the bond, the Gringotts stuff, the ring, Crouch, the task, he paused. I still don't know what I'm doing most of the time. I'm just doing it loudly now. Ron was quiet for a moment. Then he said, you really think Crouch is being controlled? Yeah. Something sitting in him that isn't him. Fleur felt it too. Ron looked up. That's connected to the tournament. To whoever put your name in. Yes. So whoever put your name in has access to Crouch, who runs the tournament, which means, the third task, Harry said. Whatever happens in the third task, someone is designing it specifically. Ron was quiet. Something in his expression solidified, the figuring it out moving into the clear waters of decision. He looked at Harry with the expression of someone who has found where he actually stands. Right, he said. So we figure it out before June. Yeah, Harry said. We. Not just you. Obviously we, Harry said. Ron nodded. The shadow that had been in his face since the article was not gone. It wasn't that simple, things like this didn't resolve in a single conversation, they just got picked up and carried differently, but it had moved. Found a more manageable position. Fleur's letter arrived an hour ago, Ron said. Beau's batons. Another one. She told you. Told Hermione. Hermione told me. He paused. The board is threatening to withdraw her academic certification retroactively. The certification she needs for the French ministry apprenticeship she's been working toward for 3 years. Harry stared at him. Can they do that? He said. Hermione says technically yes, practically it would be unprecedented and legally contested, but yes. Harry stood up. Where are you going? Ron said. To find Fleur, Harry said. She was in the reading room, but not reading. She was sitting with both hands flat on the table and looking at the wall with the specific quality of someone who has been processing something for a while and has arrived at the far side of it, past the anger, past the fear, at the place where the person is left with just themselves and the decision in front of them. Harry sat down. "You heard," she said. "Ron told me." Hermione told Ron. He paused. "Can they actually do it? The retroactive certification thing? They can make the process very difficult. Expensive. Years of legal action, during which the certification is in question and I cannot use it." She looked at her hands on the table. "The apprenticeship requires certified status. Without it, the position is unavailable. And without that position," she stopped. 3 years of specific preparation toward a specific goal. What was the goal? She was quiet for a moment. "Magical law," she said. "International. The intersection of Elder Law, European wizarding rights, and Muggle World Treaty obligations." She paused. "There are approximately 11 people in Europe doing this work at the level I want to do it at, and getting there requires," she stopped again. "It requires the certification." Harry looked at her. At the hands flat on the table. At the composure that was held in place by something more fundamental than performance, the specific steel of someone who has had to fight for every serious thing they've wanted because the world kept deciding the beautiful girl from Beauxbatons wasn't serious. "Fleur," he said. "I'm sorry. This is because of me." She looked at him sharply. "No. The board would have left you alone if the bond hadn't, the board would have found something else," she said. "The bond is simply what they ave now. Before it was my Veela blood making me an unreliable magical entity. Before that it was my accent in formal settings. Before that it was," she stopped. "They have always been looking for reasons to manage me. I ave always found reasons for them to fail." She held his gaze. "I am not going to stop because they found a larger reason." He held her gaze. "Hermione is already looking at the certification law," he said. "I know. She sent me a note an hour ago." Something moved through Fleur's expression, something soft and surprised and quickly schooled. Your Hermione is extraordinary. She would love to hear you say that. I told her in the note." A pause. "She cried, apparently. A small amount." Harry absorbed this. The image of Hermione receiving a sincere compliment from Fleur and crying a small amount was one of the more complete pictures his imagination had produced in some time. "Fleur," he said. She looked at him. "Dinner," he said. "We said. After the task. When things settled." "Things ave not settled," she said, gesturing at the general concept of their situation. "No," he said. "But they might not for a while. And we said just us." He paused. "The kitchen elves will do a tray if you ask them nicely. I know a room on the 4th floor that nobody uses." Another pause. "We don't have to talk about any of it. Crouch or the ministry or the board. We could just," he searched for it. "We could just have dinner." She looked at him. The composure was present, but behind it, there it was, the thing he'd learned to look for, the genuine response moving through the silver-gray eyes before the architecture could catch up. "Just dinner," she said. "Just dinner," he said. She stood up. He stood up. They walked out of the reading room together and the castle was quiet around them, and somewhere above the clouds the stars were doing what stars did, entirely indifferent to the affairs of people below, which Harry found oddly comforting. The room on the 4th floor was a spare classroom that had been decommissioned at some point in the last century, its furniture pushed to the walls, a window that looked east over the grounds. Harry had cleared it out one afternoon and put a rug in it and 2 chairs and a small table, on the basis that having one room in the castle that wasn't a bedroom or a public space seemed like a reasonable thing to have. The kitchen elves had been, as Harry had predicted, enormously enthusiastic. The tray was excessive in the best possible way, a proper dinner, warm, with bread and some kind of magnificent soup and a small dessert that one of the elves had apparently made specifically for the occasion. They sat across from each other and ate, and it was normal. Genuinely, unexpectedly normal. Fleur talked about her childhood home in the south of France, near a valley where the Veela clans had lived for centuries. Harry talked about the Dursleys, which he almost never did, but something about the room and the food and the hour of the night made it easy, not painful, or not primarily painful, more like a fact of history reported by someone who had acquired enough distance to see it as data rather than wound. She listened without the expression of someone performing sympathy. She just listened, and when he finished she said, "You were not damaged by it." "Maybe a little," he said. "Not in the ways that matter," she said. "The ways that matter are intact." A pause. "I think that is your mother's work. Her enchantments in that ring, they were not only protective. They were, nurturing is the wrong word. Something older than nurturing. Something that kept the essential self," she searched. "Intact," she said again. "Whatever the Dursleys did or failed to do, your essential self was kept." Harry looked at the ring. At the dark red stone with its interior light. "She thought of everything," he said. "She was afraid," Fleur said simply. "Fear is a remarkable motivator for careful thinking." They were quiet for a while. The castle's deep nighttime quiet had settled around the room, the particular piece of an old building with most of its inhabitants asleep. "Tell me about magical law," Harry said. "Why that specifically?" She looked up. Not the look that assessed whether the question was genuine, she'd stopped doing that with him around the third week. This was the look that was deciding where to start. "When I was 12, she said, a boy in my class used a charm on me. A compulsion charm. Small, he wanted me to say something embarrassing in front of the class. He did it because he thought my Veela blood meant I was not," she paused. "That I was not in full possession of my own choices anyway, so one more compulsion made no difference." Harry's hand had tightened around his fork. He put it down deliberately. "He got away with it," she said. "The teacher saw. The school saw. And the position was that Veela-influenced individuals were difficult to assess legally because of the question of their own allure's influence on observers. A circular logic. A closed loop designed to make accountability impossible." She looked at her hands. "I decided then that I wanted to find the laws that closed the loop. That protected people like me. Not because I needed protecting," the chin came up, reflexive. "But because other people do. And because it was wrong and someone had to," she stopped. "Someone had to actually do something about it," Harry said. "Yes." She looked at him. "Yes." He held her gaze. "Hermione will find the certification law," he said. "And when I take the Wisengamot seat in February, I will be in a position to, Harry." Her voice was quiet but absolute. "I do not need you to fix this for me." He stopped. "I need you to," she paused. "Not to let the fact that you could fix it prevent you from letting me fix it myself." She met his eyes steadily. I've been solving my problems for a long time. I am good at it. What I need is someone who," she searched the word again. "Who is alongside me. Not in front." He held this. Let it settle into the actual shape of what she was saying. "Alongside," he said. "Yes. I can do that," he said. She studied him for a moment, with the full attention she brought to things that mattered. "I know," she said. "It is why I am here." They finished dinner. The candle on the small table burned lower. Neither of them moved to leave. "Harry," she said, at some point well past midnight. "Yeah. The Wisengamot session. February. I'll be there." "I know." A pause. "I would like to be there also." "In the gallery." She held his gaze. "Not because you need support. Because I want to see it." You walking in and claiming what is yours. Something moved through her expression, quiet and certain. I want to be there. Harry looked at her in the candlelight, in their room that wasn't anything except theirs, and felt the bond, and beside the bond something that was growing into its own shape, specific, chosen, real. Yeah, he said. I'd like that. She looked at the last of the candle. We should sleep, she said. Yeah. Neither of them moved for another few minutes. Then she stood, and he stood, and they carried the tray back to the corridor for the elves, and they walked toward their separate wings in the sleeping castle. At the turning of the corridor where they went different ways, she stopped and faced him. She was close. The castle was very quiet. The torch behind her put light in her hair. Harry, she said. He waited. She reached out and touched the ring on his finger. Just touched it, 2 fingertips, brief, the specific gesture of someone acknowledging something real. Your mother, she said, would have been remarkable. He felt it in his throat. Held it there, warm and aching, and nodded. Yeah, he said. She would have. Fleur walked away down the corridor, silver and quiet in the torchlight, and the castle breathed around her. Harry stood at the turning and held the warmth in his chest, the bond, and his mother's ring, and the specific irreplaceable feeling of being known, and the darkness of the castle felt nothing like waiting. It felt like home. Chapter 6, What We Choose. The maze arrived in June the way all terrible things arrived, with good weather. The grounds had gone properly summer by the first of the month, the kind of warm that turned the lake into hammered copper in the evenings and made the castle's stones hold heat long into the night. Students revised for exams in the courtyard with their shoes off. The Quidditch pitch sat empty and golden. Even the forbidden forest had softened at its edges, the darkness inside it less absolute, the tree leaned fuller and greener and looking, from a distance, almost inviting. The maze had been growing in the Quidditch pitch since April, the hedges seeded by Hagrid, fed by Sprout, reaching slowly upward through May until by the last week of the month they were 20 feet high, dark green and absolute, and whatever enchantments had been placed on them to make them actively hostile to passage had given the entire pitch a quality that students learned quickly to avoid, a pressure in the air at its perimeter, an instinctive sense of not this way that bypassed the thinking parts of the brain and went straight to the old animal ones. Harry had been watching it grow for 6 weeks. He'd been watching it and working, which was all he'd been doing since February, working on his magic, working with Fleur, working with Hermione and Ron on the problem of Bartemius Crouch Sr. and the person or thing that was sitting inside him, and designing the task that was supposed to kill Harry. Crouch had disappeared entirely from public view in March, announced still by the Ministry in language that suggested they knew more than they were saying and had decided that saying it was worse than the alternative. Harry had told Dumbledore what he and Fleur had observed at the lakeside. Dumbledore had listened with the careful attention of a man who is receiving confirmation of something he already suspected. The Imperious Curse, Dumbledore had said. Yes. I believe so. Who? Harry had said. Someone who has had access to Mr. Crouch for some time. He'd looked at Harry steadily. I am working on it. Is working on it going to be finished before the 3rd task? Harry had said. A pause. I am endeavoring to ensure that it is. That had not been a yes. The Wisengamot session in February had happened. Harry would keep that morning for the rest of his life the way you keep certain mornings, complete, specific, every detail preserved by the particular attention of a moment that matters beyond its immediate facts. He'd walked into the Wisengamot chamber in the Ministry building in London wearing his Hogwarts robes and the Potter family ring, with McGonagall at his left and no one at his right because Hermione and Ron weren't permitted inside the chamber, and he'd sat in the hereditary Potter seat, which had been empty for 13 years and which the attendant had undraped from its covering cloth with a small deliberate ceremony that Harry had not expected to find moving and found moving, and he'd looked at the assembled Wisengamot members and the Ministry officials in the gallery and the reporters and the general assembled weight of the institution, and he had felt the ring warm on his finger and thought of his mother, and he had not been afraid. Vance had been there. She'd watched him with the expression she'd worn in Dumbledore's office, the reassessment, the recalibration, the professional respect that had evolved, over the months since the Yule Ball, into something that looked almost like genuine regard for a competent adversary. The Ministry's argument about the elder laws had been made. Hermione's counter-arguments had been presented, by a wizarding barrister Sirius Black had arranged and paid for from Azkaban via a series of letters that Harry had found both heartbreaking and deeply characteristic of his godfather. The Wisengamot had voted. The elder laws stood. 47-9. Afterward, in the corridor outside the chamber, Madame Bones had stopped Harry. She was a square, solid woman with a monocle and the bearing of someone who had decided decades ago that the primary purpose of the law was the law and had organized her entire professional life around the consequences of this decision. "Well argued," she said. "My barrister argued it," Harry said. "Your barrister argued well because you gave him good material. She studied him. You understand that today is a beginning, not an ending." "Yes," Harry said. "Good." She turned to leave, then stopped. "Mr. Potter." The situation around the third task, she said it carefully, in a way that communicated she knew more than she could say in a corridor. "Be careful. And be ready." She looked at the ring. "Both of you." She walked away. In the public gallery, Fleur had been watching from the moment Harry walked in. He'd known she was there before he saw her, the bond's compass, the specific warmth. When it was over he'd looked up and found her and she'd been standing at the gallery rail, and her face in that moment, unguarded and clear, had been the full version of something he'd been watching develop since December. Not love yet. He was honest enough with himself to know that love was a word that needed time to mean itself properly. But the shape of what it was going to be was fully visible, and it was very specific, and it had chosen them both freely. The morning of the third task was June 24th, a Tuesday. Harry woke at 5 and lay in the dawn dark listening to the castle breathe and felt the day's weight settle onto him with the specific gravity of things that will not be postponed. He knew more than he was supposed to. Malfoy had delivered 3 more pieces of information since January, careful, specific, always framed as practical observation rather than allegiance. The third task involved a maze. Inside the maze were creatures and enchanted obstacles. At the center of the maze was the Triwizard Cup. The cup was a portkey. That last piece was the one that had changed everything. He'd told Dumbledore. He'd told Fleur. He'd told Hermione and Ron and Cedric, in a private conversation in the Empty Charms classroom 3 weeks ago where Cedric had listened to the full account with growing stillness and then said, in a very quiet voice, "The cup is a portkey to where, exactly?" "I don't know," Harry had said. "Wherever Voldemort needs me to be." Cedric had been quiet for a long moment. "Right," he'd said. "Right. So what do we do about it?" That question had occupied the subsequent 3 weeks. The answer they'd arrived at, through argument and iteration and several sessions where Hermione had been so wound up she'd written through 3 quills, was this: they couldn't prevent Harry from being in the maze, the tournament contract was binding. They couldn't intercept the cup without triggering its portkey function prematurely. What they could do was prepare for both possibilities, maze and arrival, with the full unblocked force of what Harry now was. There was one other element. The bond, Fleur had said, in their 4th-floor room 2 weeks ago. She'd been standing at the window with her arms crossed, which was her thinking posture. "If you take the cup. If the portkey activates." "Yes," Harry had said. "The bond will register it. I will feel it, the distance, if you go somewhere and I, ave not, you'll know," Harry said. "Immediately." "Yes." She'd turned from the window. "And the bond's resonance over distance it is not a communication channel, it is not a tracking spell, but it is," she'd paused. "It is a persistent connection. Old magic. It cannot be severed by a portkey. The distance would be, I would feel the distance, and I would feel if," she'd stopped. He'd looked at her. "If something happened to me," he said. "Yes." Her voice had been very controlled. If something happened to you. He'd crossed the room and stood in front of her, and she'd met his eyes with the particular directness she used when she had decided to be fully honest regardless of the cost of it. I am asking you, she'd said, not to be careless. I'm not careless, he'd said. You are exactly careless when it is yourself at stake. She'd held his gaze. You care enormously about other people's safety and you have a historical tendency to treat your own as secondary. A pause. I am asking you to treat it as equivalent. For me. If not for yourself. He'd looked at her for a long moment. At the silver-gray eyes, the architecture that was down, the real version of her face. Okay, he had said. For you. She'd looked at him. Something moved in her expression, the full, quiet weight of it. Good, she'd said. At breakfast, Harry found letters. One from Sirius, urgent and warm, saying everything Sirius always said in letters, which was the love of a man who had lost too much and was communicating through ink and parchment that he intended to lose nothing more. One from Remus Lupin, steady, careful, specific advice about magical endurance that Harry read 3 times. One from Neville, which was unexpected and short and said simply, we're watching and we're with you. Don't be a hero. Be smart. Those aren't the same thing. Which Harry privately thought was the best advice he'd received. Ron was across from him and not eating, which for Ron was the equivalent of anyone else running in circles screaming. Eat something, Harry said. I am. You've had 1 piece of toast in 20 minutes. It's a very thorough piece of toast. Ron looked at him. Harry. I know. If anything, I know. I'm just saying, Ron. Harry looked at him. I know. It's mutual. He paused. Watch Hermione. She's going to be in the stands and she's going to be fine until she's not, and when she's not she's going to need someone to be sensible. Ron opened his mouth. Closed it. I'm not sensible. You're the most sensible person I know when someone else needs you to be. Harry held his gaze. So be that. Ron looked at his toast. Right, he said. Very quietly. Right. Hermione arrived, sat down, and immediately said, I've reviewed everything. Your preparation is excellent. The wandless work is at a level that no one will be expecting. The ring's enchantments will provide additional protection that I've documented in a brief I've given to 3 separate people in case anything. She stopped. I'm babbling. Yeah, Harry said. I'm frightened, she said, with the directness of someone who has decided that honesty is more useful than composure. Me too, Harry said. Eat breakfast. She looked at him. The 3 of us, Harry said, are going to eat breakfast together on June 25th. That's she stopped. That's not something you can guarantee. No. But it's something I'm going to do everything in my power to make true. He met her eyes. Okay. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she reached for the toast. Okay, she said. The champions were called at 6 in the evening. The summer light was still long and gold, the kind of evening that felt like it had been specifically arranged for something to happen inside, and the Quidditch pitch in its maze form had shed the academic year's distance and become simply itself, the thing it had been growing toward all spring, tall and dark and absolute. The stands were full. Harry could hear it before he reached the pitch, the crowd sound, the specific frequency of 500 people assembled for something they knew was significant. He walked out with the other champions into the open space before the maze entrance and the sound hit him properly, and he stood in it and felt the ring warm on his finger and his magic full and present in his chest and thought about Neville's letter, don't be a hero, be smart, and looked at the maze. Cedric was beside him. They'd been here before, in some version of this, 2 people standing in front of something dangerous and understanding each other without much need for conversation. Whatever happens in there, Cedric said quietly. Yeah, Harry said. If it's what you think, he paused. Don't take it alone. I won't, Harry said. He looked for Fleur in the starting lineup. She was there, 2 positions down, and she was looking at the maze with the expression she wore when she was working, focused, assessing, entirely present. She felt him look. Turned her head. The bond ran between them like a struck string. She held his gaze for 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, everything they'd talked about in late nights and small rooms, her grandmother's road, his mother's ring, 900 years of covenant, the Wisingamot chamber, dinner in a 4th-floor room, her hand on the ring, alongside not in front, be careful for me, all of it present in 3 seconds of mutual, clear-eyed acknowledgement. She looked back at the maze. He looked at the maze. Bagman's whistle. Inside the maze, the dark was absolute. Not darkness of night, which has stars and ambient glow and the shapes of things. Darkness of intent, magical dark, pressed in at all sides and navigated only by the lumos Harry produced without a wand, the light floating ahead of him like something alive, and the bond's compass in his chest pointing, everywhere at once as they spread through the maze, for different directions, the 3 other champions' warmth diffusing in the hedge dark. He moved fast. Faster than he'd moved in any previous task, the full unblocked version of his magic making his awareness of his surroundings so comprehensive that the maze's attempts at confusion, the hedges that shifted, the paths that tried to redirect, the enchanted dark that tried to swallow direction, failed against the simple fact of what he was. The creatures came in the first 10 minutes. A blast ended script first, which he redirected with a sustained repulsion field that sent it sideways through the hedge without engaging it directly. A boggart that presented itself as Voldemort, which he dismantled with a ridiculous that came out so complete and immediate that the thing didn't have time to fully resolve its form. A section of maze floor that tried to become a bog, which he walked across on a sustained ground-hardening charm that he maintained while reading the path ahead. The maze responded to him differently than it would have in September. He could feel it, the maze's own enchantments, designed to challenge a specific level of magical capacity, encountering something considerably beyond that specification and recalibrating, escalating, the challenges becoming more complex and layered as he moved deeper. It was, he thought, almost respectful. Like a designed obstacle course recognizing that the person on the course was better than the course had planned for and trying to keep up. He let it keep up. He kept moving. At the maze's midpoint, he could feel the geometry of it, the wards, the structure, something changed. The bond spiked. Not the gentle compass warmth or the heightened resonance they'd felt in the lake or the quiet certainty of shared acknowledgement. This was sharp and specific, a flare, sudden and immediately damped, from the quadrant of the maze that was Fleur's. He stopped. 2 seconds of full attention to what the bond was saying. Not pain, not the quality of hurt, nothing bodily. But something that had been present and was suddenly less so, the way a voice cuts out on the edge of range, and then stabilized, present but strained. She'd encountered something she hadn't anticipated. He was moving before he'd consciously decided to, which was, he acknowledged, the heroism Neville had warned him against, except Neville hadn't been accounting for the bond and Neville hadn't been accounting for the specific person in question, who would be absolutely furious at him and absolutely correct to be, and he was going anyway. He found her at a junction of 3 hedge paths, and the thing she was dealing with was a sphinx. Not the standard Triwizard Sphinx, not the riddle-asking, politely impassive variety. This one had been modified. Magically altered, the specific sharp-edged quality of creature transfiguration pushed past ethical limits, and it was significantly larger than a sphinx had any natural right to be, and it was not asking riddles. Fleur was standing in the path with her wand up, and she had the wand up because she'd been using it. There was evidence of several completed spells and the scorch marks on the hedge behind the sphinx, and she was absolutely fine. She had handled it. But the handling had taken something out of her, and the maze's escalating response to his presence had pushed the sphinx past what the hedge obstacles had been set to be, and she'd been dealing with a task modification she hadn't been warned about. She heard him before she saw him, turned her head, the bond registering his approach, and her expression did 3 things in rapid sequence: relief, immediately suppressed, annoyance at the relief, displayed briefly and precisely, and then the clean, working attention of a professional encountering an unexpected collaborator. "I had it," she said. "I know," he said. "You felt the, yes. I was not in danger." "I know." He was looking at the Sphinx. "But the maze has been escalating in response to me, and I think it's affecting the whole structure. Your challenges are harder than they should be because I've pushed the calibration past its design ceiling." She processed this for exactly 2 seconds. "So it is your fault?" "Technically yes." "Right." She lowered her wand slightly. "Go ahead then. We're faster together than separately." He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything about the fact that they were choosing to move through the maze together, which was technically not against the rules but was certainly not what the rules had anticipated, and which would produce exactly the philosophical problem with the scoring that Fred and George had raised at breakfast months ago. They moved. The maze's final quadrant was different in quality from everything before it, not more complex, but more deliberate, the challenges arranged with a specific intentionality that felt less like an obstacle course and more like a funnel. Something drawing them toward the center. The cup's light was visible above the last hedge wall, pale gold, floating, pulse steady. And in the path immediately before the final section, they found Cedric. He was on his feet, which was the most important thing, but he was moving carefully, the right way to move when something has happened to the ankle. He saw Harry and Fleur, and something in his face went through relief into a specific kind of alert. "Portkey," he said, before either of them reached him. "The cup. I figured it out this week. Should have told you earlier, I didn't know you'd already." "We know," Harry said. 3 weeks ago." Cedric exhaled. "Right. Right, of course you did." He looked at the cup's light above the hedge. "Someone's waiting where it goes. Someone's been waiting all year." He paused. "Harry. I'm not going to reach that cup before you. The ankle is," he looked down. "It's not bad, but it's real. I'm telling you to take it and be ready for what's on the other side." "I'm not leaving you in here," Harry said. "I'm not asking you to leave me, I'm asking you to. There are 3 of us," Fleur said. Both men looked at her. She had her wand in her hand, and her expression had the specific quality of someone who has run the calculation and arrived at a decision. 3 is better than 1. 3 is better than 2. She looked at Harry. "You knew this was coming. You've been preparing for it." "We've been preparing for it." She looked at Cedric. "Are you capable of standing and casting?" "Yes," Cedric said, with the precise dignity of a Hufflepuff who finds the question slightly unnecessary. "Then we go together," Fleur said. "Whatever is on the other side of that cup, 3 prepared people are harder to plan against than 1. Harry looked at the cup. At Cedric. At Fleur. "Together," he said. They each reached for it at the same moment, and the portkey took them. The world dissolved in the familiar gut-wrench of forced transit and resolved into darkness and the smell of earth and old grass, and somewhere the sound of a fire in a cauldron that had been burning for some time. A graveyard. Harry knew it immediately, not from memory, but from the dark specific quality of the place, the stone crosses and markers in irregular rows, the yew tree at the far edge, the way the night felt different here from Hogwarts nights, older and less inhabited and very, very still. The fire was centered on a large stone cauldron in the clearing between the graves, and beside the cauldron was a man holding something, and the man was Peter Pettigrew, and the something was the thing that had been living in Bartemius Crouch Sr. for the past 6 months, small and malformed and radiating the specific cold that Harry had felt at the back of his neck since he was a child, the cold of the scar, the cold of a presence in the dark. Voldemort. Or what was left of him. Harry had his magic up before Pettigrew moved. It was not the instinctive reaction of someone surprised, it was the prepared state of someone who had spent 3 months knowing this moment was coming and had chosen not to arrive in it without everything he had. "Hold the portkey," he said to Cedric, quick and low. "If it goes wrong, you take it back. You go back. Harry, you're the one who shouldn't have been here at all. If it goes wrong, If it goes wrong, Fleur said, beside him, in a voice that was very quiet and very absolute, we all go back together. Wormtail. Pettigrew's name in Voldemort's voice, thin and high and carrying the specific resonance of magic that had been warped past what nature intended. Pettigrew moved. What happened next happened in about 4 seconds of compressed, extremely fast decision-making. Pettigrew was casting, the ritual, the blood, the terrible specific magic of the cauldron that Harry had seen in the vision the scar had given him months ago, the thing that had been growing in his nightmares, the thing designed to give Voldemort a body and the body given by Harry Potter's blood. Pettigrew's wand was up. The incantation had started. Harry threw up a wandless shield of a kind he'd never attempted before, not a standard protego, not a repulsion field, but the thing he'd found in 3 months of practice that existed below the level of named spells, the pure architectural fact of his magic placed between him and the world. It hit Pettigrew's casting like a wall meets water, and the water won a little. The ritual magic was old and hungry and specifically designed for its purpose, but the wall won more, and the incantation broke, incomplete. Pettigrew stumbled. The cauldron's fire lurched. And Voldemort, held in his deformed state, turned the full weight of his attention onto Harry. There was a moment, very brief, not long enough to be called a moment really, more like the space between one heartbeat and the next, where Harry felt the scope of what he was looking at. Not a person. Not even the ruin of a person. Something that had chosen to unmake itself in pursuit of what it wanted, and had been unmaking for decades, and was now at the far edge of what a thing can be and still claim the word living. He also felt the bond. Not the compass, not the warmth, something different. The bond responding to a direct threat to one of its parties with the full weight of what it was made of, which was very old magic indeed, and the specific thing it did was this: it opened. It opened between him and Fleur like a door, and what came through the door was not communication or warning but pure resonance, her magic and his magic meeting in the space between them and doing the thing the Covenant document had described, the sympathetic vibration, the two tuning forks at the same frequency, and the result was not twice what either of them could do alone. It was something else entirely. Harry had no name for it and didn't need one. He felt it and he used it, and what he used it for was a single, specific, complete piece of magic directed at Pettigrew and the cauldron, not a killing curse, nothing so simple, but a disruption of the ritual at its most fundamental level, the unwinding of old dark magic by something older than the dark had time to account for. The cauldron went cold. It didn't explode. It didn't crack. It simply went cold, the fire extinguished, the ritual magic dissolved, the specific terrible thing that had been gathering in it for years simply not there anymore. Pettigrew staggered as if he'd been pulled forward by something that had suddenly vanished. Voldemort made a sound. Harry had never heard a sound like it and he would be many years processing what it was, not pain, exactly, but the sound of a thing that has been reaching for something for a very long time and had it removed from reach at the last possible moment. Something furious and bereft and fundamentally unable to accept what had just happened. Pettigrew ran. Harry let him go. He was not the priority. Voldemort, without a body, without the ritual, without the blood, was still present. Still real, in the way that something purely malevolent is real even without physical form. He was also, without Pettigrew, without the cauldron, without the specific preparation for which Harry had been a necessary ingredient, limited. Not harmless. Not gone. But limited. Harry. Cedric's voice. I know. We should, I know. Harry kept his eyes on the dark form of Voldemort, the cold presence hovering at the edge of the cauldron's stone. Fleur. Here, she said, directly behind his left shoulder. The portkey. Yes. He reached back without turning and found her hand, she gave it without hesitation, and he felt Cedric take his other hand, and Fleur's magic was still running alongside his, the resonance still open, and he thought one specific thing very clearly: not tonight. Not tonight. Not in a graveyard. Not alone and unprepared and at a disadvantage. Voldemort said his name. His real name, The one everyone was afraid of, said it the way you say the name of something that belongs to you. Harry said, very clearly, no. He reached for the portkey. The world dissolved and resolved, and they were on the Quidditch pitch in the summer evening light, and the crowd in the stands was roaring, and Harry was on his knees in the grass, and Fleur was beside him, and Cedric was beside her, and they were all three breathing, loud, ragged, completely unbeautiful breathing, the kind that follows surviving something. Dumbledore was there. Then McGonagall. Then Madame Maxime, who descended on Fleur with the focused concern of a person who has been watching from the stands and arrived at a specific internal reading of events that she intended to verify personally. Fleur submitted to examination for exactly 10 seconds and then said, I am fine. Attend to Harry. I'm fine, Harry said. You are both saying you are fine, Madame Maxime said, looking between them with the expression of someone who has been dealing with young people claiming to be fine for 30 years. This means very little. I disrupted the ritual, Harry said to Dumbledore. The words came out steady, which surprised him slightly. Voldemort was there. Pettigrew, Wormtail, was there. The cup was a portkey, as expected. He looked at the headmaster. The ritual failed. He doesn't have a body. He's still out there, somewhere, but he doesn't have what he came for. Dumbledore's face in that moment was something Harry had not seen before, the full, unguarded weight of relief, complicated by the grief of someone who understands relief is not the same as resolution, but relief first, human relief, the specific lightness of a fear not realized. Are you certain? He said. Yes, Harry said. The magic, the bond, he looked at Fleur. We disrupted it together. The ritual needs the blood to complete. The cauldron went cold before, he stopped. Before it could. Dumbledore looked at Fleur. She met his gaze with the steady silver-gray clarity of someone who has no reason to be anything other than honest. Together, she confirmed. Dumbledore looked at Harry's hand. At the ring. At something that was not either of those things but encompassed them. Yes, he said quietly. Together. The hours after were enormous and complicated, and Harry was only present for some of them. There was the medical examination, which Madame Pomfrey conducted with the specific efficiency of someone who considers excessive drama unprofessional but was nevertheless moving faster than her standard pace. There was the conversation with Dumbledore that lasted 2 hours and covered the graveyard in exhaustive detail, Harry speaking clearly and completely while Hermione took notes at the adjacent table because she had asked permission to be present for Harry's account and Dumbledore had agreed and Harry had been glad of it. There was the ministry representative who arrived at 9 o'clock and who Harry directed, with perfect courtesy, to speak with his legal representative, which caused enough administrative confusion to buy 48 hours of peace. There was Ron, who appeared in the hospital wing at the first opportunity and said nothing but sat in the chair beside Harry's bed with the absolute solidarity of someone who has decided that presence is more useful than words, which was the most sophisticated emotional intelligence Harry had ever observed from him and which he found he could not say without crying a small amount, which he managed to do with the curtains drawn. There was Cedric, later, when the hospital wing had thinned out, sitting across from Harry with 2 cups of something warm from the kitchens and the expression of someone who has shared a significant experience and is still integrating it. Level 7, Cedric said. Yeah. You disrupted a Voldemort ritual. He said it the way he said Voldemort, completely, no euphemism, the Hufflepuff version of courage which was simply doing the thing without the dramatic announcement of doing it. With wandless magic. With the bond. With Fleur, Harry said. Not just the bond. With her. Cedric looked at him. Something in his expression was thoughtful and warm and entirely without envy, which had always been one of the specific things about Cedric Diggory. Good, he said. Yeah, Harry said. The tournament result, Cedric said, with a slight shift in tone that communicated he was moving to a different topic but from the same place. With everything that happened, 3 of us taking the cup, the portkey, the graveyard, the judges are going to have a genuinely unprecedented situation. Bagman looked like he was going to faint when we came back through, Harry said. I think he did faint briefly. Behind the judge's table. Karkaroff, Cedric stopped. Karkaroff wasn't in the stands. Harry looked at him. He wasn't there when we came back, Cedric said. I looked for him. He's not, I think he's gone. I think he ran. Harry thought about Karkaroff and the year's worth of unease he'd carried around the man, the specific quality of someone with debts they knew were coming due. He thought about where those debts led. Dumbledore will know, he said. Yes, Cedric agreed. They sat in the summer hospital wing quiet for a while. Harry, Cedric said. Yeah. Next year. When we're not in the tournament anymore, and things are just, school. He paused. I'd like to be friends. Properly. Not just the occasional shared near-death experience. Harry looked at him. We're already friends, he said. Cedric looked faintly surprised, and then faintly pleased, and then faintly embarrassed at being faintly pleased. Right, he said. Good. Fleur came at 10 o'clock. Madame Pomfrey, who had been holding the ward at a sensible population density all evening, looked at her and made a professional assessment and opened the door. The hospital wing was empty now except for Harry, who was sitting up in the bed with the curtains open and a plate of something Hermione had brought from the kitchens and was pretending to eat. Fleur sat in the bedside chair and looked at him. Madame Maxime checked me 3 times, she said. I am confirmed to be without damage. Good, Harry said. She also cried, which I was not expecting. A pause. She is not a person who cries in the standard way. It was very brief and she denied it immediately afterward. She was frightened, Harry said. Yes. Fleur looked at her hands. Many people were frightened tonight. I am finding that I need a moment with that. She paused. That what we did in the graveyard scared the people who care about me. And you, he said. She looked up. You can say that, he said. I'm not going to think less of you. She held his gaze. The composure was entirely absent, not the frightened version from the Yule Ball and not the working version from the maze, just her, just the person. Yes, she said. And me. She paused. It was not the way I was scared in the maze. In the maze I was, focused. It was task fear, manageable. In the graveyard, she stopped. In the graveyard you faced something that wanted specifically to harm you. Something that has been wanting to harm you since you were a child. And I was standing behind you and the bond was, she stopped again. I have never felt anything like what the bond did. What we did. The resonance, he said. It was not just resonance, she said. It was what my grandmere meant. It was what she could not find words for. She looked at him steadily. I understand why there is no word big enough. Harry held that. Fleur, he said. Yes. I need to say something. And I need you to hear it without immediately telling me you're fine or that you handled it or that you don't need anything. She was very still. When I felt the spike in the maze, he said. When the bond told me something had changed for you, I was moving before I thought about it. Not because of the bond. Because it was you. He paused. I know that's not, I know we sat alongside, and I know you had it, and I know you didn't need me, Harry, she said. I'm not done. She went still again. I was frightened, he said. Not the way I'm usually frightened, which is about losing something, people, or the world, or whatever's at stake in a given terrible situation. I was frightened in a way I don't have a lot of experience with. He looked at her. The specific fear of something happening to a specific person. A pause. That's new. For me. I wanted you to know. The room was very quiet. She looked at him for a long time, not the assessment look, not the composure behind which something moves look. Just looking at him, taking him in, being present with what he'd said. I know, she said. I felt it. Through the bond. A pause. I want to tell you, I felt you feel it, and, she stopped. Started differently. When the bond opened. In the graveyard. I did not open it. Did you? No, he said. It opened. Yes. She paused. I think, she chose her words with the care she used for important things. I think the bond opened because we are no longer two people with an ancient connection considering whether to choose it. Her voice was quiet and precise. I think it opened because we have already chosen. Harry looked at her. Have we? He said. She met his eyes. The composure, the architecture, the defenses, all of it gone. Just the person, just the choice, just the truth of what had been building since December in reading rooms and corridors and battlements and a room on the 4th floor. I have, she said. Me too, he said. The simplicity of it was enormous. Outside the hospital wing windows the summer night was full of stars, not the enchanted ceiling, the actual sky, stars as they were without mediation, and the grounds below were warm and dark and entirely still. Inside, the candles burned. The ring on Harry's finger was warm. The bond between them was open, fully, not the gate that had been cracked or held or tentatively approached, but the door her grandmother had described, the road that asked everything and gave back something no one had found a word for. Come here, Fleur said. He leaned forward and she leaned forward and she put her forehead against his, the way her grandmother had done it, the old Veela gesture of recognition between bonded pairs that she had described once and he had remembered and she had known he'd remember, and the bond ran between them like light through open water. They stayed like that for a long moment. Then she pulled back and looked at him and the thing in her expression was the full version of itself, not the suggested smile, not the corner of the mouth near thing, but the real one, the one that didn't often get out, and it changed her face in the way that it changed the face of someone who has learned to be careful about what they show and has decided, finally, that this specific thing is worth showing. We have a great deal of work ahead of us, she said. Yeah, he said. Voldemort, the ministry, your certification, my Wisingamot seat, I was not talking about any of that, she said. He looked at her. I was talking about us, she said. Getting this right. Which is going to take, she paused. A great deal of work. The road is hard and real and long, he said. Yes, she said. And asks everything. He held her gaze. I've got everything to give, he said. She looked at him for one more long moment. Then she stood up, and straightened her robes, and picked up her bag, and moved toward the door with the particular grace that was just her, just the way she moved through the world, Veela blood and Beauxbatons training in 3 years of preparation for a career in magical law and the specific ferocity with which she loved her sister. At the door she stopped. Turned around. Harry. Yeah. Breakfast, she said. Tomorrow. Not the Great Hall. Our room. He looked at her. The kitchen elves, she said, will not object. He felt the smile come up, genuine, unguarded, the full version. No, he said. They really won't. She looked at him. Something in her face was warm and clear and specific, the full weight of a person who has decided, and the decision was visible and unhidden and entirely hers. Good night, she said. She walked out of the hospital wing and the door closed behind her, and Harry lay back against his pillows and looked at the summer stars through the window and felt the bond warm and open in his chest and beside the bond everything that was not the bond, everything that was specifically and personally his and specifically and personally about her. The road was ahead of them. Long and hard and real and asking everything. He couldn't wait. 3 floors above the hospital wing, in the reading room on the 4th floor, the candle they'd forgotten to blow out 2 weeks ago had been replaced by someone, probably an elf, and it burned steadily in the empty room, warm light on 2 chairs and a small table, a room that wasn't anything except theirs. The castle breathed around it. The summer night held still. Outside, Under stars that had been there long before any of this and would be there long after, the grounds of Hogwarts lay quiet in the dark, and somewhere in the forbidden forest something old moved through the trees, and somewhere far away in a graveyard a cold fire had gone cold forever, and somewhere in the Ministry of Magic a hereditary seat in the Wizengamot waited for its occupant's return. And in the hospital wing, Harry Potter slept, and dreamed for the first time in his life of nothing in particular. Just warmth. Just presence. Just the quiet, unambiguous knowledge of being exactly where he was supposed to be. Just that. Just enough.